Eldridge County,
Can
Wyoming
you pretend to
Territory,
be my husband
autumn
tonight?
1879. The moon hung full and cold in the night sky, its silver light spilling across the small graveyard at the edge of town. The shadows of crooked headstones stretched long across the frost-kissed grass. Only the distant howl of a coyote broke the midnight silence. Abigail Winters drove the shovel into the earth with desperate force. Her breath came in white clouds as her muscles strained against the cold, unyielding soil. She had waited for this moonlit night, for the hour when even the most dedicated drinkers at Rivercross Saloon would have stumbled home. Her shovel hit something solid. Wood. Abigail dropped to her knees, brushing dirt away with trembling hands. She had rehearsed this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, her heart hammered against her ribs like a wild bird seeking escape. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. Her husband,
Can you
God,
pretend to be
or
my
the law she
husband
was
tonight?
breaking. Using the edge of her shovel, Abigail pried open the pine box. The hinges creaked in protest, the sound obscenely loud in the silent cemetery. She held her breath, raised her lantern, and looked inside. Rocks. Nothing but rocks and a few personal effects arranged to mimic the weight of a man. No body, no remains of Nathan Winters. Her hands shook as she reached into the coffin. Among the stones lay Nathan's pocket watch, his wedding ring, and the silver compass he always carried. She lifted the compass, its metal cold against her palm. The lid sprang open to reveal the words engraved inside. "Find true north." A twig snapped in the distance. Abigail's head jerked up. Lantern light glinted off the barrel of a rifle at the edge of the cemetery. Then another, and another. "That's her," a man's voice called. "Mrs. Winters!" Abigail scrambled out of the
pretend to be
grave,
my husband
clutching
tonight?
the compass. A gunshot cracked through the night, splintering the headstone beside her. She ran, ducking between monuments, her dark cloak billowing behind her like wings. More shots followed as men on horseback appeared at the cemetery gate. Harrison Caldwell's men. The banker who had bought her husband's debts, who had pressured her to sell the land, who had threatened her with worse when she refused. Abigail reached her horse tethered at the far side of the graveyard. Another shot rang out, this one closer. Something hot tore through her calf. Pain blossomed, sharp and immediate. She bit down on her cry, pulled herself into the saddle with sheer will, and kicked her mare into motion. The autumn wind cut through her clothes as she rode hard across the open prairie. The sound of pursuit growing louder behind her, rain began to fall, first gentle, then in sheets that turned the earth to mud. Her horse struggled, its
Can you
footing
pretend to be
uncertain
my
in the
husband
darkness.
tonight?
Lightning split the sky. In that brief illumination, she saw the silhouettes of her pursuers, 5 men, maybe more. Caldwell's hired guns, gaining ground. The mare stumbled, its forelegs sinking deep into a hidden hole. Abigail was thrown, hitting the ground with bone-jarring force. Pain radiated from her injured leg. Blood seeped through her torn skirt, mixing with rain and earth. The compass was still clutched in her hand, its edges digging into her palm. The sound of approaching hoofbeats slowed, measured, and unhurried now. They knew she was injured. They knew she couldn't run. Lightning flashed again, and Abigail saw a lone rider approaching from the east, not from the direction of her pursuers. A tall figure on a black horse, outlined against the storm-ridden sky. The stranger's face was shadowed beneath a wide hat, water streaming from its brim. He reined his horse to a stop beside her.
Can you
Eyes,
pretend to be
gray
my
as
husband
gunmetal in
tonight?
the dim light, assessed her from beneath the hat brim. "You hurt?" His voice was low, roughened by wind and disuse. Abigail pressed herself back against the mud, one hand still gripping the compass, the other reaching for the small knife hidden in her boot. "I fell," she managed. "My horse." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots sinking into the mud. Without asking permission, he knelt beside her, gloved hands gently examining her wounded leg. "Bullet?" he asked, his expression unreadable. She hesitated, then nodded. Behind them, shouts carried on the wind. The stranger's head turned sharply, listening. Without another word, he lifted her, his strength surprising for his lean frame. Pain shot through her leg, but Abigail bit back her cry. He set her on his horse, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a cage of warmth against the driving rain. "Hold tight," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. As they rode through the storm, Abigail felt the compass pressing against her heart, its weight both comfort and burden. The stranger kept them to the low ground, avoiding ridge lines where they might be silhouetted. "Who are you running from?" he asked after they had put some distance between themselves and her pursuers. Abigail weighed her words carefully. "Men who want something that isn't theirs." The stranger made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. "And what's that in your hand? The thing you're holding, like it might save your life." She tucked the compass deeper into her palm. "A way home." Lightning illuminated his face for a brief moment, strong jaw darkened with stubble, a jagged scar running along his left cheekbone, eyes that had seen too much. He nodded once, as if her cryptic answer told him everything he needed to know. "Rivercross is about 3 miles east," he said. "There's a boarding house there. You'll be safe for the night." In the distance, the lights of Rivercross appeared through the rain like yellow eyes in the darkness. The small town had grown with the promise of the coming railroad, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the old trade route and the newer wagon trails. As they approached, Abigail became aware of how this would look. A woman arriving late at night with an unknown man, both of them soaked and muddy. She straightened in the saddle, ignoring the pain that shot through her leg. "Your name," she said. "I should know what to call you." There was a pause, as if he was deciding whether to tell her the truth. "Noah," he said finally. "Noah Sullivan." She nodded. "Abigail Winters." "Mrs. Winters," he acknowledged, the formality a reminder of the boundaries between them. The boarding house door opened before they reached it, revealing a stout woman in her 50s, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. Mrs. Hannigan, the proprietress, took in their bedraggled appearance with narrowed eyes. "We don't take in strays after 10, she said, her gaze lingering on Abigail's torn and muddy skirts. "The lady needs a room," Noah said, his voice quiet but firm, "and a fire." Mrs. Hannigan's expression softened slightly as she noticed Abigail's pallor and the way she leaned against Noah. "There's been trouble?" "Her horse fell in the storm," Noah said before Abigail could speak. "She's injured her leg." "Just my luck," Mrs. Hannigan muttered. "Dr. Finch is out at the Cooper farm for a birthing." She stepped back, allowing them inside. "Well, come in before you flood my porch." "You'll need to sign the register," Mrs. Hannigan said, moving behind a small desk. "I run a respectable house." Abigail limped forward, still supported by Noah. She took the offered pen with a shaking hand. Mrs. Hannigan watched her with sharp eyes. "You traveling alone, Mrs.?" "Winters," Abigail supplied. "And no, my husband was supposed to meet me here." She glanced at Noah, hoping he would understand and not contradict her. He must have been delayed by the storm. Mrs. Hannigan handed Abigail a small brass key. "Room 3, top of the stairs. Keep the fire low. Wood's scarce." Noah remained in the common room as Mrs. Hannigan helped Abigail upstairs. Once inside the small room, Abigail sank gratefully onto the edge of the narrow bed. The room was simple but clean. A bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a small writing desk, and a cast-iron stove in the corner. "Let's have a look at that leg," Mrs. Hannigan said, lighting the lamp beside the bed. "I've seen my share of injuries." Abigail hesitated. "It's nothing serious, just a scratch." "Mm-hmm." The older woman was already rolling up Abigail's torn skirt. She stilled when she saw the bullet wound. "That's not from a fall, girl." Their eyes met, a moment of silent understanding passing between them. "It's a long story," Abigail said quietly. Hannigan's lips pressed into a thin line. "Always is." She stood and moved to the door. "I'll get my medicine box, and I won't ask questions you don't want to answer. But in my experience, a woman running from something usually has good reason." Left alone, Abigail finally opened her hand. The compass lay in her palm, its silver case tarnished but still beautiful. She ran her thumb over the engraved words inside the lid. "Find true north." Nathan had carried it every day of their marriage. She had thought it was a family heirloom, but now she wondered if it was something else entirely, another secret among the many her husband had kept. Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain lashing against the window like angry fingers demanding entry. Abigail closed her eyes, the compass clutched to her heart, and allowed herself a moment of pure, undiluted grief for the life she had once believed was hers. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through thin curtains. Abigail woke disoriented, her body stiff from sleeping in an unfamiliar bed. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she had gotten there. Then the pain in her leg brought everything rushing back. The empty grave, the chase, the stranger called Noah Sullivan. The compass lay on the bedside table where she had placed it before sleep claimed her. In the morning light, she could see details she had missed in the darkness. Small scratches on its silver case, a faded inscription on the back that was too worn to read. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Hannigan's entrance. The older woman carried a tray with a steaming cup of coffee and a plate of biscuits. "You're awake," she said, setting the tray on the small table. "Good. We need to talk before too many folks are stirring." Abigail accepted the coffee gratefully. "About what?" Mrs. Hannigan sat on the edge of the bed, her usually stern face softened with concern. "About your story, girl. It needs work." She held up in a hand to forestall Abigail's protest. "I don't care what trouble you're in. That's your business. But if you're staying here, you need a better tale than a husband who's mysteriously delayed." "I'm not planning to stay long," Abigail said. "Just until my leg heals enough to travel." The older woman snorted. "And go where? On foot? With men hunting you?" She shook her head. "No, you need time and a place to hide in plain sight. And for that, you need a better story." "What would you suggest?" "The truth, as much as you can tell. You're a widow. That part's easy enough to see in your eyes. You're heading west for a fresh start. Simple. Believable. And when people ask questions?" "They always do," Mrs. Hannigan agreed. "But a woman alone invites more than questions. She invites trouble." She paused, measuring her words. "That man who brought you in last night. Sullivan, you could do worse." Abigail nearly choked on her coffee. "Mrs. Hannigan, I barely know him." "I'm not suggesting anything improper," the older woman said, though the twinkle in her eyes suggested otherwise. "Just that two travelers are less remarkable than one, especially when one of them is a woman with a bullet wound." After Mrs. Hannigan left, Abigail dressed slowly in a borrowed blue calico dress. The compass went into her pocket, a constant weight against her thigh. She needed to think about her next move. Caldwell's men would be looking for her, especially now that she had proof Nathan's body wasn't in his grave. But what did that mean? Was her husband alive? And if so, why had he let her believe he was dead for 2 years? A movement outside her window caught her attention. On the street below, Noah Sullivan was leading his black horse to the town's small livery stable. In daylight, he cut an imposing figure, tall and rangy, moving with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to watching his back. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, their eyes meeting briefly across the distance. Abigail stepped back from the window, her heart inexplicably racing. There was something about him that unsettled her. Not fear exactly, but a sense that he was more than he appeared to be. The front door opened and Noah stepped inside. He had shed his duster, revealing a simple flannel shirt and worn leather vest. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster tied down against his thigh, the mark of a man who expected to use his weapon quickly. "Mrs. Winters," he said, removing his hat. "Good to see you on your feet." "Thanks to your help," she replied. "Mrs. Hannigan says you've decided to stay in Rivercross for a while." A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed his face. "Word travels fast. It's a small town." "So it is." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. "And you? Will you be staying until your husband arrives?" The question held no particular emphasis, but Abigail felt its weight nonetheless. "I'm not sure," she said truthfully. "I have business to attend to." Before she could respond, the front door burst open again. A man in a marshal's uniform stepped inside, his hand resting casually on the butt of his revolver. He was in his 40s, with a sun-weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Hannigan," and he called, "you've got some new guests I need to meet." The boarding house keeper emerged from the back rooms, wiping her hands on her apron. "Marshal Holt, what brings you by so early?" "Just doing my rounds." The marshal's gaze traveled from Noah to Abigail, assessing them with professional interest. "Got reports of some disturbance out at the cemetery last night. Gunshots. Thought I'd check on any newcomers to town." Abigail felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral. Beside her, Noah had gone very still, though his posture remained relaxed. "I'm checking everyone's papers today," Marshal Holt continued. "Railway companies got the territory spooked about agitators and troublemakers. Everyone needs to be accounted for. My guests are respectable folk, Mrs. Hannigan said, a defensive edge to her voice. I'm sure they are. Holt's smile didn't reach his eyes. But I'll need to see identification all the same. Territory law. Abigail's stomach dropped. She had nothing, no papers, no identification. Everything she owned had been in her saddlebags when her horse bolted. Noah stepped forward, his movement drawing the marshal's attention away from her. Noah Sullivan, he said, extending his hand. Blacksmith by trade, looking for work with the railway. Holt shook his hand, though his expression remained wary. Papers? Noah reached into his vest pocket and produced a folded document, which the marshal examined carefully before handing back. And the lady? Holt turned his attention to Abigail. Before she could fumble through an explanation, Noah moved to stand beside her. My wife, he said smoothly. Abigail Sullivan. Abigail froze, her eyes widening fractionally before she controlled her reaction. Noah's hands settled lightly at the small of her back, a gentle pressure urging her to play along. We were married in Denver last month, Noah continued, came north looking for a fresh start. Marshal Holt's gaze moved between them, searching for inconsistencies. You have a marriage certificate? In our luggage, Noah said without hesitation, which is currently delayed. The stagecoach company promised it would arrive tomorrow. Holt frowned. Convenient. Inconvenient, actually, Noah countered with a hint of irritation. My wife's clothes, my tools, everything we need to set up our new life. The marshal's attention shifted to Abigail, who forced a smile. It's been a trying journey, she said, allowing some of her genuine exhaustion to show. I'm afraid I twisted my ankle when we arrived last night in that dreadful storm. That's so? Holt's eyes narrowed. Funny coincidence. The cemetery caretaker reported seeing a woman with a dark cloak last night, around the same time as those gunshots. Abigail felt her heart skip a beat. Noah's hand pressed more firmly against her back. Well, we arrived on the evening stage, he said, his tone even. You can check with the driver. Man named Jenkins, if I recall correctly. It was a risky lie, one that could be easily disproven if Holt bothered to investigate, but it was delivered with such confidence that Abigail almost believed it herself. The marshal seemed to weigh his options, then shrugged. I'll do that. He turned back to Mrs. Hannigan. Anything else I should know about? Just that breakfast is getting cold, she replied tartly, and I don't hold meals for anyone, badge or no. After Holt left, Abigail released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Noah's hand fell away from her back, the absence of his touch strangely noticeable. You shouldn't have done that, she said quietly. Lied about being married to me. It could cause trouble for you. Less trouble than the alternative. His eyes met hers, serious and direct. Holt's looking for someone to blame for whatever happened at the cemetery. A woman traveling alone with no papers and a mysterious husband would be an easy target. So now I'm Mrs. Sullivan, she said, testing the name on her tongue. At least until the fictional luggage fails to arrive. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. By then, we'll have a better plan. As they sat across from each other at Mrs. Hannigan's worn oak table, Abigail found herself studying Noah Sullivan more carefully. His hands were calloused but clean, his nails trimmed, not what she would expect from a traveling blacksmith. He ate with the efficiency of a soldier, cleaning his plate methodically. And though he appeared relaxed, his eyes continually scanned the room, checking the windows and door with regular frequency. You're not really a blacksmith, are you? She asked after Mrs. Hannigan had left them with coffee. Noah's expression didn't change. What makes you say that? Your hands, they're strong but not fire-scarred, and you carry yourself like, she hesitated. Like what, Mrs. Sullivan? There was a challenge in the way he used her new false name, like a man who's used to watching his back. Abigail met his gaze steadily, like a man with secrets. Most people have secrets, he replied, some more dangerous than others. Before she could respond, Mrs. Hannigan returned, this time accompanied by a thin man in a shabby suit. His spectacles sat crookedly on his nose, and his receding hairline glistened with perspiration despite the cool morning. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, Mrs. Hannigan said, her emphasis on the Mrs. slight but noticeable. This is Mr. Perkins, the town clerk. Perkins bobbed his head in greeting. A pleasure. I understand you're new to Rivercross. Noah stood, offering his hand. Just arrived, looking for work with the railway. Ah, excellent timing. Perkins brightened. The company is indeed hiring skilled labor, but I'm actually here about a different matter. He produced a thick ledger from his battered satchel. Mrs. Hannigan mentioned you're awaiting your luggage and might appreciate temporary accommodations more spacious than a boarding house room. Abigail exchanged a glance with Noah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. That's very thoughtful, she said. What did you have in mind? Perkins opened the ledger to a page marked with a ribbon. Rivercross is eager to attract settlers, especially those with useful skills. The town council has authorized me to offer a land grant to qualified newcomers. There's a small cabin available on the east side of town near the river. It was a trading post some years back before the new road was built. And what qualifies someone for this generous offer? Noah asked, his tone carefully neutral. Married couples with skills beneficial to the community, Perkins said, beaming. A blacksmith and his wife would certainly qualify. The arrangement would be temporary at first, 1 month to establish yourselves. After that, you'd have the option to purchase the property or move on. Abigail felt a flutter of panic. This charade was spiraling beyond a simple lie to avoid the marshal's questions. She opened her mouth to decline, but Noah spoke first. That sounds promising, he said. We'd like to see this cabin. Perkins' smile widened. Excellent. I can take you there directly. As Perkins gathered his papers, Abigail gripped Noah's arm, pulling him slightly aside. What are you doing? She whispered. We can't actually pretend to be married. His eyes met hers, steady and serious. You need a safe place to recover. I need a reason to stay in Rivercross without drawing attention. This solves both problems. For how long? Until you can travel safely, or until you find what you're looking for. His gaze dropped briefly to the pocket where she kept the compass. A week, maybe 2. Abigail wanted to protest further, but Perkins was already waiting by the door, keys jingling eagerly in his hand. And the truth was, she did need time. Time to heal, time to think, time to figure out what Nathan's empty grave meant and what her next move should be. 1 week, she agreed finally, and then we go our separate ways. Noah nodded once, the matter settled. 1 week, Mrs. Sullivan. The cabin was indeed rough, just as Perkins had warned. It stood in a small clearing near a bend in the river, surrounded by cottonwood trees whose leaves had turned gold with autumn's touch. The main structure was a single room with a stone fireplace, its chimney listing slightly to the east. A lean-to at the back served as a rudimentary kitchen. A small stable and storage shed completed the modest homestead. Abigail noticed small carvings on the wooden lintel above the door, symbols she recognized from her mother's people. Protection signs. A chill ran through her, though whether from recognition or premonition, she couldn't tell. Inside, the cabin was dusty but surprisingly intact. A table and 2 chairs stood near the fireplace. A rope bed frame occupied one corner, its straw mattress long since removed. The packed earth floor had been partially covered with worn rugs of native design. It's perfect, Noah said, surprising Abigail. We'll take it. As Noah signed with a practiced hand, Abigail found herself wondering what she had gotten herself into. A week pretending to be married to a man she barely knew, a man with secrets as deep as her own. She took the pen when offered, signing Abigail Sullivan with deliberate strokes, the false name another link in a chain of deceptions that seemed to be growing longer by the hour. The key is yours, Perkins said, handing it to Noah. I'll have some supplies sent out, basic necessities to get you started. After Perkins left, the silence between them stretched uncomfortably. Noah moved to the fireplace, checking the chimney's draw. I'll sleep in the shed, Ezra said finally, his back to her. It's dry enough. Abigail released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I can take the shed. You found this place. No. His tone brooked no argument. You take the cabin. Your leg needs proper rest. She couldn't disagree with that logic, though the arrangement still felt strange. What now? Do we actually try to live here for a week? Noah turned to face her, his expression grave. We maintain the appearance of a married couple settling into a new home. I'll look for work in town. Gather information. You rest and recover. He paused. And perhaps you might tell me why men were shooting at you in a graveyard last night. Abigail's hand went automatically to her pocket, feeling the outline of the compass. It's complicated. It usually is when bullets are involved. He moved to the window, looking out toward the river. I won't press you for details you're not ready to share. But if we're to maintain this charade, it would help to know what kind of trouble might come looking for you. Oh. She studied him, the set of his shoulders, the way he positioned himself with clear sight lines to both the door and window. A cautious man, a man familiar with danger. My husband, she began slowly, testing how much he was willing to reveal. Nathan Winters. He was a railway engineer. 2 years ago, there was an accident at a mining site. An explosion. They said he was killed. Noah turned, his eyes intent on her face. But you don't believe that? I didn't at first. I grieved. I accepted it. Her fingers traced the outline of the compass through her pocket. Until I found some of his papers hidden in our home. Records of land acquisitions by the railway company, irregularities, and a note that mentioned a meeting the day after he supposedly died. So you went to his grave, Noah concluded, and found it empty. Abigail nodded. Just rocks and a few personal items, including this. She withdrew the compass, holding it in her open palm. He carried it every day of our marriage, said it was a family heirloom. Noah's reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around his eyes, a slight intake of breath. He knew something about the compass, or one very like it. May I? He asked, extending his hand. Abigail hesitated, then placed the compass in his palm. His fingers closed around it with a familiarity that sent a shiver of unease through her. Find true north, he read the inscription aloud, his voice strangely hollow. You've seen it before, she said. It wasn't a question. Noah's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw raw emotion there, a deep, old pain that he quickly masked. One similar, he said, returning the compass to her. A long time ago. The next few days established a tentative rhythm to their unusual arrangement. Noah left each morning for town, where he had found work helping the local farrier. The railway construction had brought an influx of horses needing shoes and repairs to wagons. It was a convenient position, allowing him to gather information from travelers and workers without arousing suspicion. Abigail remained at the cabin, her injured leg gradually improving. She kept busy making the sparse dwelling more habitable, sweeping the dirt floor, washing the windows with vinegar water, patching holes in the roof. She discovered a small garden plot behind the cabin, overgrown but still containing a few hardy herbs and vegetables the previous occupant had planted. As she worked in the garden one afternoon, kneeling carefully to avoid straining her wound, she noticed small stone markers around the perimeter. They were arranged in a pattern she recognized, an Arapaho protection circle, similar to ones her mother had shown her as a child. Abigail touched one of the stones, weathered smooth by time and elements. Her mother had been Arapaho, her father a boundary rider for the territory who had fallen in love with the beautiful daughter of a medicine man. Their union had been viewed with suspicion from both communities. White settlers who considered Indians little more than savages, and tribal elders who saw white men as destroyers of their way of life. Abigail had been raised between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. After her mother's death from smallpox when Abigail was 14, her father had insisted she embrace her white heritage exclusively. It's the only way you'll survive, he had told her, and so she had learned to hide the parts of herself that marked her as different, straightening her dark hair, avoiding the sun to keep her skin from darkening, forgetting the language her mother had taught her. A twig snapped behind her. Abigail turned sharply, wincing as pain shot through her injured leg. A small girl stood at the edge of the garden, watching her with solemn eyes. She was perhaps 10 years old, thin and wiry, with a mass of dark curls framing a face dominated by startling blue eyes. Her dress was faded but clean, patched in several places with different colored fabrics. "Hello," Abigail said, surprised. They had no near neighbors that she knew of. The girl didn't respond immediately, her gaze moving from Abigail to the stone markers and back again. "You're touching the spirit stones," she said finally. Her voice was soft but clear. "Grandmother Four Winds said no one should move them." Abigail's hand fell away from the stone. "I didn't know. I was just gardening." The girl nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "You're the new wife, from the East." "Yes," Abigail said, the lie now practiced enough to come easily. "My name is Abigail. Sullivan." The hesitation was slight but noticeable. And you are? Grace, the girl took a step closer, her curiosity evidently overcoming her caution. Grace Wilson. I live with my uncle at the mill, down by the bend. She pointed vaguely eastward. Abigail smiled, carefully rising to her feet. Her leg protested, but she managed to stand without grimacing. It's nice to meet you, Grace. Would you like some water? It's a warm day for so late in the season. Inside the cabin, Abigail poured water from the ceramic jug Noah had filled that morning. Grace accepted the cup with both hands, her eyes darting around the cabin's interior. You made it pretty, she observed, taking in the wildflowers Abigail had arranged in a chipped mug, the brightly colored quilt now covering the rope bed. I'm trying to make it feel like home, Abigail said, watching as the girl sipped her water. There was something unusual about Grace, a gravity beyond her years, and those remarkable blue eyes that seemed to see more than they should. It was home to Grandmother Four Winds, Grace said, before they made her leave. The railway company? Grace nodded. Uncle says the train will bring progress. He says the Indians need to move aside for progress. She pronounced the word carefully, as if repeating something she had heard many times but didn't fully understand. And what do you think? Abigail asked. The girl's gaze was direct and unsettlingly perceptive. I think Grandmother was sad to leave. She taught me about the plants and the stones, said they protect against bad spirits. Abigail felt a strange connection to this child who spoke so matter-of-factly about beliefs most white settlers would dismiss as superstition. My mother believes similar things, she said softly. Grace's eyes widened slightly. Was she Indian too? The question caught Abigail off guard. She had been careful to present herself as a respectable white woman, the persona she had cultivated for years. But something about Grace's direct gaze made lying feel impossible. Yes, she admitted. Arapaho, like your grandmother Four Winds, I think. A smile transformed Grace's solemn face. I knew it. I could see it in your eyes. They're like the river, dark on top, but with light underneath. Before Abigail could respond to this poetic observation, the cabin door opened. Noah stepped inside, stopping short when he saw they had a visitor. Grace Wilson, Abigail said by way of explanation. Our neighbor from the mill. Noah's expression remained neutral, but Abigail had begun to recognize the subtle signs of his wariness. The slight tension in his shoulders. The boy's right hand stayed close to his hip, where his gun would normally be. Miss Wilson, he said with a polite nod. I wasn't aware we had company. I was just leaving, Grace said, returning the water cup to Abigail. Uncle doesn't like me to wander far. She moved toward the door, then paused beside Noah, her head tilted as she looked up at him, studying his face with that same unnerving intensity. You have a mark, she said, pointing to the scar on his cheekbone, like the letter E. Noah's hand rose involuntarily to his face. An old wound. Does it hurt still? Only in bad weather, he replied, something in his tone softening. Grace nodded as if this confirmed something she already knew. Goodbye, Mrs. Sullivan. Goodbye, Mr. E. With that cryptic farewell, she slipped past him and out the door. Abigail and Ezra watched through the window as the small figure made her way along the path toward the river, soon disappearing among the trees. Unusual child, Ezra commented. Yes. Abigail turned to him, noticing for the first time that he carried a package wrapped in brown paper. What's that? He set the package on the table. Supplies and information. He began unwrapping the parcel, revealing several tins of food, a roll of bandages, and a folded newspaper. There's talk in town about the railroad company buying up land along the planned route. That's hardly news, Abigail said, examining the supplies. That's what railroad companies do. The interesting part, Noah continued, is how they're acquiring certain parcels, specifically those belonging to people who aren't inclined to sell. Abigail's attention sharpened. What do you mean? Noah unfolded the newspaper, the River Cross Register, dated 2 weeks earlier. There's been a series of accidents, fires, structural collapses, all affecting property owners who refused the company's initial offers. He tapped a small article on the second page. The latest was a mining engineer named Cooper. Rockslide caught him while he was inspecting a potential railway cut, left a widow and 3 children. And you think these weren't accidents? I think it's a pattern worth noting. Noah's eyes met hers, serious and intent, especially given your husband's profession and the nature of his death. Abigail felt a chill run through her. You think Nathan's accident was deliberate? I think it's a possibility worth considering. He paused. Did he ever mention anyone named Thomas Holloway? The name wasn't familiar, but something in Noah's tone made Abigail certain it was significant. No, who is he? Noah hesitated, a subtle war playing out in his expression. Finally, he said, a man who died in circumstances similar to your husband's. He was investigating land acquisition practices for a newspaper back east. And you knew him, Abigail guessed, watching Noah's face carefully. We served together during the war. The words were clipped, offering information without invitation for further questions. Abigail sensed there was more, much more that he wasn't telling her. But she was hardly in a position to demand complete honesty, given her own secrets. Instead, she changed the subject. Marshal Holt came by earlier. Noah's posture tensed immediately. What did he want? To check on my ankle, officially. She moved to the stove, busying herself with lighting the fire for their evening meal. Though I suspect he was really checking whether our story holds water. And does it? There was a hint of dry humor in his voice. For now. She glanced at him over her shoulder, though he did ask several pointed questions about our wedding and how we met. I told him we married in Denver after a whirlwind courtship. Said you swept me off your feet with your quiet charm. A ghost of a smile touched Noah's lips. Quiet charm? It seemed plausible. Abigail turned back to the stove, oddly flustered by that almost smile. In any case, he appeared satisfied for the moment. But he mentioned something else that might interest you. Oh? There's been a series of killings in the territory. Railway officials and land agents. 3 men shot at close range in the past 6 months. She kept her voice deliberately casual. Holt says they're looking for a former Union soldier named Ezra Bishop. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. When Abigail turned back to face Noah, his expression had gone completely blank, a mask so perfect it could only have been deliberately constructed. Is that so? He said finally, his voice neutral. Holt described him as tall, dark-haired, with a distinctive scar on his left cheek. Abigail met his gaze steadily, like the letter E. Noah held her eyes for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he moved to the window, checking outside before drawing the curtain closed. When he turned back to her, his posture had changed, more alert, more dangerous. What else did Holt say about this Ezra Bishop? That he's considered armed and extremely dangerous, that there's a substantial reward for his capture. She paused. And that he has a personal vendetta against the railway company, particularly its land acquisition practices. Noah, or Ezra, she supposed, studied her face, clearly gauging whether she was afraid. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled. I didn't kill those men, but I know who did. Why should I believe you? Abigail asked, even as she realized she already did, at least partially. You shouldn't, you barely know me. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. But I'm not a murderer, Mrs. Winters. She noted his use of her real name, a tacit acknowledgement that pretenses had fallen away between them. Then who are you, really? He seemed to weigh out his options, then came to a decision. I was Ezra Bishop, Captain, Union Army, Massachusetts 20th Infantry. After the war, I worked as a journalist for the Boston Herald. His eyes found hers again. Now I'm a man trying to expose corruption that's already cost too many lives. Including Thomas Holloway's, Abigail guessed. Ezra nodded once, watches. He was more than a fellow soldier, he was my closest friend. He discovered that certain railway officials were using inside information about planned routes to acquire land cheaply, sometimes through intimidation or worse. When he got too close to the truth, there was an accident at a construction site. The parallels to Nathan's death were unmistakable. And you believe the same people responsible for Thomas's death might have killed my husband. It's possible. Ezra moved to the table, spreading out the newspaper. I've been tracking land purchases along the proposed railway route, looking for patterns. Your husband's name appears in several documents as the surveyor who certified the routes. Nathan was an honest man, Abigail said, defensive despite her own doubts. He wouldn't have been part of anything corrupt. which might explain why he is no longer alive, or at least no longer in his grave. Ezra's gaze was sympathetic but unflinching. What exactly did you find in those papers of his? Abigail hesitated. She had kept Nathan's documents hidden for over a year, uncertain whom to trust with their contents. But Ezra, Noah, whoever he was, had already risked himself by revealing his identity to her. Wait here, she said, making her decision. She limped to the bed, kneeling awkwardly beside it. Beneath one corner of the rope frame, she had pried up a floorboard that morning and created a small hiding place. From it, she retrieved a folded packet of papers wrapped in oilskin. I took these with me when I fled my home, she explained, returning to the table. After Caldwell, the banker who bought up Nathan's debts, started pressing me to sell our land. Ezra accepted the packet, unfolding it carefully. Inside were surveyor's notes, maps with penciled annotations, and a small leather-bound journal. He opened the journal first, thumbing through pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. These are dated right up until the day before his supposed death, he noted. Yes, and look at the last entry. Ezra turned to the final page where a hastily scrawled note read, Meeting H tomorrow at Silver Creek. Confirm route change. Below it was a rough sketch of what appeared to be a mountain pass, with the letters TN marked at a specific point. True north, Ezra murmured, his finger tracing the letters. I thought it might be a surveyor's reference, Abigail said. But now I wonder if it has something to do with the compass. Ezra closed the journal thoughtfully. Perhaps both. He looked up at her. Did your husband ever mention Silvertop? It's a mining town about 50 miles west of here. Abigail frowned, trying to recall. He traveled there occasionally, said it was part of the survey route. A memory surfaced. The last time he went, just before the accident, he seemed unsettled when he returned, distracted. Silvertop is where Thomas was last seen alive, Ezra said, and it's the headquarters for Harrison Caldwell's banking operation. The pieces were beginning to align in a pattern Abigail found increasingly disturbing. You think Nathan discovered something in Silvertop, something that got him killed, or forced him to disappear. It's a theory. Ezra gathered the papers, rewrapping them carefully. One worth investigating. Evening shadows stretched across the cabin floor as Abigail and Ezra finished their simple dinner. The revelation of his true identity hung between them. Not quite a barrier, but a new territory neither was sure how to navigate. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling through the cottonwood leaves with a sound like distant whispers. We should go to Silvertop, Abigail said suddenly, breaking the contemplative silence. If that's where the answers are, that's where I need to be. Ezra regarded her thoughtfully. We? These are my husband's papers. It's my life that's been upended. She met his gaze directly. And if Nathan is alive, I have a right to know why he let me believe he was dead for 2 years. Before Ezra could respond, a sharp knock at the door froze them both. He moved swiftly, returning the oilskin packet to Abigail, who quickly concealed it in the folds of her skirt. With a nod to confirm she was ready, he opened the door. Marshal Holt stood on the threshold, his expression grim. Behind him, the evening sky was stained orange with the setting sun. Sullivan, he said, his gaze moving past Ezra to Abigail. Mrs. Sullivan, sorry to disturb your evening. Not at all, Marshal, Ezra said easily, though Abigail could see the tension in his shoulders. What can we do for you? Holt removed his hat, turning it in his hands. Just making my rounds, checking on folks. His eyes settled on Abigail. How's that ankle coming along, ma'am? Much improved, thank you, she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear that Holt somehow knew everything. About the graveyard, about Ezra's true identity, about the papers hidden in her skirt. Glad to hear it. Holt's gaze returned to Ezra. You settling in at the farrier's shop? Well enough. Plenty of work with all the railway traffic. Holt nodded absently, his attention now moving around the cabin, taking in the small, domestic touches Abigail had added. You've made the place homey, he commented. Almost wouldn't recognize it from when the old Indian woman lived here. It was in good condition, Abigail said. Just needed a woman's touch. Holt's eyes narrowed slightly. Funny thing, got a telegraph today from the station master in Denver. No record of a stagecoach passenger named Sullivan in the past month. No luggage waiting to be forwarded, either. Ezra's expression didn't change. Clerical error, most likely. You know how those Eastern companies keep their records? Could be, Holt agreed, though his tone suggested he thought otherwise. Though it does make a man wonder what else might not be as it seems. The threat in his words was thinly veiled. Abigail stepped forward, deliberately placing herself beside Ezra. Marshal, it's getting late, and I was just about to serve dessert. Would you care to join us? I made apple cobbler. The unexpected invitation seemed to throw Holt off balance. He blinked, his stern demeanor momentarily disrupted. That's kind of you, ma'am, but I should continue my rounds. He replaced his hat. Another time, perhaps. After he left, Ezra closed the door firmly, his movements controlled despite the obvious tension in his frame. He suspects something. Yes, Abigail agreed, retrieving the hidden papers. But he's not sure what. Otherwise, he would have acted already. Ezra studied her with newfound respect. That was quick thinking, inviting him to dinner. Men like Holt are uncomfortable with domesticity, she said with a faint smile. My father was a lawman. I learned their weaknesses early. Your father. Ezra seemed to turn this new piece of information over in his mind. You mentioned your mother was Arapaho. I wouldn't have guessed. Abigail stiffened. Is that a problem? Not to me. His voice was steady, his gaze direct. But it might explain Caldwell's interest in your land. If it's part of former tribal territory, it could have significance beyond its monetary value. This perspective hadn't occurred to Abigail. The land Nathan and I owned was just a small homestead near Clearwater, which is directly in the path of the proposed railway extension. Ezra moved to the fireplace, stoking the embers thoughtfully, and possibly containing something more valuable than right-of-way. Before Abigail could ask what he meant, another knock came at the door, lighter this time, almost hesitant. They exchanged a wary glance. Were you expecting someone else? Ezra asked quietly, his hand moving to his hip where his gun would normally be. Abigail shook her head. Ezra motioned for her to step back, then approached the door cautiously. Who's there? He called. It's Grace, came the small voice from outside. Grace Wilson. Ezra relaxed slightly, opening the door to reveal the young girl standing on their porch, her thin arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. Grace, Abigail said, surprised, is everything all right? The girl's solemn eyes were wide with urgency. You need to be careful, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man with the star was talking to my uncle. About you, about the graveyard. Ezra's gaze sharpened. What did he say exactly? That people should mind their own business if they want to stay healthy. Grace glanced over her shoulder, as if afraid she'd been followed. And he said a name. Ezra said there's money for anyone who spots him. Abigail felt her heart sink. Holt was connecting the pieces faster than they'd anticipated. Ezra knelt to Grace's level, his voice gentle but serious. Did you tell anyone you were coming here? She shook her head. Uncle's at the saloon. He won't notice I'm gone until late. Thank you for the warning, Abigail said. But you should go home now. It's not safe for you to be involved in this. Grace hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in a scrap of faded cloth. Grandmother Four Winds left this behind. I think you should have it. Abigail accepted the tiny bundle, unwrapping it to reveal a small stone carving. An animal figure, perhaps a wolf or coyote, worn smooth by years of handling. It's a protection spirit, Grace explained, for journeys. She looked between Ezra and Abigail with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. I think you're going on a journey soon. Ezra's expression betrayed nothing, but Abigail felt a chill run down her spine. What makes you say that? I saw it in a dream. Grace said it matter-of-factly as if describing the weather. You were both riding toward mountains, following a silver circle. The compass. Abigail's hand moved instinctively to her pocket where it rested. Dreams are just dreams, Ezra said gently. Grace shook her head with the conviction of absolute certainty. Not mine. She backed toward the door. I should go. Be careful, Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. E. With that, she slipped out into the gathering darkness. Abigail stared at the stone carving in her palm. The figure was indeed a coyote, the trickster, the wanderer between worlds. Her mother had told her stories of Coyote, who could change his shape but never his essential nature. She's right, Ezra said, breaking the silence. We need to leave, tonight. Abigail nodded, closing her fingers around the small carving. Silvertop? Yes. His expression was grim. But we can't take the main road. Holt will have men watching it by morning. There's an old Arapaho trail through the foothills, Abigail said. My mother showed me once. It's longer, but less traveled. Ezra studied her face, a new respect in his eyes. Can you find it again, after all these years? Abigail thought of her mother, of the knowledge she had tried to bury along with her Arapaho heritage, of the compass that now seemed to be pointing her back toward that forgotten part of herself. Yes, she said with quiet certainty, I can find it. They packed quickly, taking only what they could carry on horseback. Ezra had acquired a second horse, a sturdy bay mare which he had been keeping at the livery stable as a precaution. By the time the moon rose, they were heading west along the riverbank, away from the main trails. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the dark sky like fragments of ice. Abigail rode slightly ahead, her eyes scanning the landscape for landmarks her mother had taught her to recognize. The wound in her leg ached, but the pain was manageable, a dull reminder of how much had changed in just a few days. There, she said, pointing to a cluster of boulders shaped vaguely like a bear's head. The trail starts beyond those rocks, up the slope. Ezra nodded, his eyes constantly moving, alert for any sign of pursuit. How long to Silvertop? 2 days, if the weather holds. Abigail guided her horse toward the hidden path. The trail follows natural shelters, caves and overhangs, places where travelers can rest unseen. Your mother taught you well, he observed. Abigail felt a complicated mix of pride and sorrow. She tried. I wasn't always willing to learn. She paused. After she did, it was easier to forget, to become what everyone expected, just another settler's daughter. And now? She glanced back at him, her face half illuminated by moonlight. Now I'm starting to think that forgetting was the real mistake. They rode in silence for a time, the only sounds the soft thud of hooves on earth and the occasional call of a nightbird. The trail climbed steadily into the foothills, winding through stands of pine and aspen. Abigail found herself remembering the journey with her mother more clearly with each mile. The scent of sage and pine, the feeling of being held in the embrace of ancient mountains. We should rest soon, Ezra said as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky. The horses need it, and so do we. Abigail nodded, scanning the terrain ahead. There's a sheltered hollow about a mile further. Water, grass for the horses, and good visibility. The hollow was just as she remembered, a natural depression in the mountainside, partially enclosed by rock walls and sheltered by a stand of tall pines. A small spring bubbled up from between rocks, creating a shallow pool before disappearing underground again. They dismounted, Ezra helping Abigail down with careful hands. The simple touch sent an unexpected warmth through her, a reminder of human connection in this wild place. I'll gather wood, he said, releasing her perhaps a moment longer than necessary. You should rest your leg. I'm not made of glass, she protested mildly, but sat on a flat boulder near the spring, stretching her injured leg with a wince. Ezra smiled, a rare sight that transformed his serious face. I never thought you were, Mrs. Winters. As he moved off to collect firewood, Abigail found herself watching him. The way he moved with deliberate economy, always aware of his surroundings. A soldier's habits, ingrained by war and honed by years of vigilance. Yet there was something else about him, a gentleness that emerged in unexpected moments, with grace, with the horses, even with Abigail herself. By the time he returned with an armload of dry branches, she had unsaddled the horses and set out their meager provisions, jerky, hardtack, and coffee. Ezra built a small fire, keeping it low to minimize smoke. We should take turns sleeping, he said, handing her a cup of strong coffee. 4 hours each. I'll take first watch. Abigail wanted to argue but found herself stifling a yawn. The night's ride had taken more out of her than she cared to admit. Wake me at midday, then. She unrolled her blanket in a sheltered spot, using her saddle as a pillow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come immediately. Her mind raced with questions about Nathan, about the compass, about the man keeping watch just a few yards away. Ezra, she said softly, not sure if he could hear her. Yes, his voice came back immediately. Thank you for believing me, for helping. There was a pause. I have my own reasons for going to Silvertop. I know. She turned her head to look at him silhouetted against the lightning sky. But you could have gone alone. He didn't respond for a long moment. Then so quietly she almost missed it. Some journeys are better not taken alone. Abigail closed her eyes, those words following her into dreams of silver compasses and hidden paths. Abigail woke to the scent of coffee and the soft murmur of Ezra's voice. For a moment she lay still, listening. He was speaking to the horses in low, soothing tones as he checked their hooves and adjusted their tack. The simple domesticity of the scene made her heart ache with an unexpected longing. She had been alone for so long after Nathan's death, alone with her grief, her suspicions, her growing conviction that something wasn't right. Now, in this strange journey with a man she barely knew, she felt a connection that both comforted and unsettled her. "You're awake," Ezra said, noticing her movement. "There's coffee, if you want it." Abigail sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. "What time is it?" "Past noon." He approached, offering her a tin cup. "You needed the rest." "You were supposed to wake me after 4 hours," she chided, accepting the coffee gratefully. Ezra shrugged. "I wasn't tired." She doubted that was true, but didn't argue. "We should reach the high pass by nightfall. There's a cave there where we can shelter." "Good." He knelt beside her, his expression serious. "Once we cross that pass, we'll be in Caldwell's territory. Silvertop is essentially his town. He owns the bank, the largest mine, and most of the businesses. We'll need to be even more cautious." Abigail sipped her coffee, the bitter warmth fortifying. "What exactly are you hoping to find there?" "Evidence linking Caldwell to the land acquisitions and the deaths that followed." Ezra's voice was steady, but Abigail could hear the tightly controlled anger beneath. "Thomas had a contact in Silvertop, someone inside the company who was passing him information. I need to find that person. And I need to know what happened to Nathan." Abigail set down her cup. "If he's alive, why he disappeared. If he's dead, who really killed him?" Ezra nodded, then hesitated. "Because we need to consider what happens if we find him alive." The use of her first name startled her almost as much as the question. "What do you mean?" "If Nathan faked his death, he had a reason." Ezra's eyes were gentle but direct. "A reason strong enough to let you believe he was dead for 2 years." Abigail hadn't allowed herself to fully confront this possibility. "You think he might have been involved in the corruption after all?" "I think we need to be prepared for any truth we might find." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Are you ready for that?" She took his hand, allowing him to pull her to her feet. "I've been living with half-truths and suspicions for 2 years. Whatever the truth is, it can't be worse than not knowing." The day's ride took them higher into the mountains, the trail narrowing as it wound through stands of pine and along the edges of steep ravines. Abigail found herself remembering more of her mother's teachings with each mile: which plants could heal, which berries were safe to eat, the shapes in the clouds that foretold weather changes. "My mother believed these mountains were alive," she told Ezra, as they paused to rest the horses. "Not just filled with life, but alive themselves, breathing, watching, remembering." "The Arapaho aren't the only ones who believe that," Ezra replied, scanning the horizon with practiced vigilance. "During the war, I knew men who swore the battlefields had memories, that places where great suffering occurred never forgot." Abigail studied his profile, wondering about the experiences that had shaped him. "Is that why you became a journalist after the war? To make sure people remembered?" A shadow crossed his face. "Partly, and partly because I thought the truth could change things." He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "I was younger then. And now you no longer believe in the power of truth?" Ezra turned to face her, his expression softening slightly. "Now I believe the truth has power, but only when people are willing to hear it, and those with the most to lose will fight hardest to silence it." They continued their journey, climbing steadily toward the high pass. By late afternoon, clouds had gathered around the mountain peaks, and the wind had taken on a bitter edge. "Storm coming," Abigail said, eyeing the darkening sky. "We need to reach that cave before it hits." Ezra nodded, urging his horse to a faster pace. They reached the pass just as the first heavy drops began to fall, the narrow trail slick with rain. The cave entrance was partially hidden by a jumble of boulders, but Abigail located it unerringly, as if her mother's spirit guided her. Inside, the cave was surprisingly deep, the air cool but not damp. Ezra led the horses inside while Abigail gathered what dry wood she could find near the entrance. By the time the storm broke in earnest, they had a small fire going, casting flickering shadows on the cave walls. "We were lucky to reach shelter in time," Ezra said, watching as rain lashed the cave entrance in silvery sheets. "This storm would have been dangerous on the trail." "Not luck," Abigail replied, unpacking their meager provisions. "My mother used to say the mountains protect those who respect them." Ezra smiled, an unexpectedly warm expression. "Then I'm glad you're with me. I suspect the mountains know you better than they know me." They shared a simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits, huddling near the fire as the storm raged outside. The cave's acoustics amplified the sound of rain and thunder, creating a cocoon of noise that made conversation difficult. Instead, they sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As the fire burned low, Abigail found herself studying Ezra's face in the dim light. The scar on his cheek, which had seemed harsh and forbidding when they first met, now struck her as a mark of character, a visible sign of a life lived with purpose, if not always with ease. "You should get some rest," he said, catching her gaze. "I'll keep watch." "You need sleep too," she countered. "We can take turns." Ezra hesitated, then nodded. "Wake me in 4 hours, and actually do it this time." Abigail smiled. "I promise." He spread his blanket on the cave floor, using his saddle as a pillow just as she had done earlier. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened, though she noticed he still slept like a soldier, one hand near his gun, positioned to see the cave entrance. The storm continued, but the cave remained dry and relatively warm. Abigail fed small branches to the fire, careful to keep it burning low but steady. In her pocket, the compass and stone coyote rested side by side, two tokens of guidance from different worlds that were, perhaps, not so different after all. She found herself thinking of Grace, the strange child with her unsettling perceptions. There had been something familiar about the girl, though Abigail couldn't place what it was. Those startling blue eyes, perhaps, so unexpected in her dark-featured face. Or the way she spoke of dreams and spirits as matter-of-factly as others might discuss the weather. Outside, the storm began to abate, rain giving way to a gentle patter against stone. Abigail moved to the cave entrance, watching as clouds parted to reveal a night sky washed clean, stars glittering with preternatural brightness. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She turned to find Ezra awake, sitting up on his blanket. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said. "You didn't." He joined her at the entrance, them keeping a respectful distance. "Old habits. I don't sleep deeply in unfamiliar places." They stood together, watching the night sky. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, clean and primeval. "I used to imagine I could see all the way to the ocean from mountains like these," Abigail said softly. "My mother told me stories of the great waters beyond the plains, though she'd never seen them herself." "I've seen the ocean," Ezra replied. "Both sides, Atlantic and Pacific." "What's it like?" He considered for a moment. "It makes you feel small, but not in a bad way, like you're part of something much larger and older than yourself." He glanced at her. "Like these mountains, I suppose." The comparison struck Abigail as profoundly right. My mother would have liked that description. A comfortable silence fell between them. Then, almost imperceptibly, the distance between them lessened, until their shoulders were nearly touching. "What happened to her?" Ezra asked. "Your mother." "Smallpox." Abigail's voice was steady, though the memory still carried pain. "I was 14. She was one of the first to fall ill when it reached our settlement. My father sent me away to stay with relatives in town, but she was already dying when I left." "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." Abigail wrapped her arms around herself against the night chill. "After she died, my father wanted me to forget everything Arapaho, to be only his daughter, not hers. He thought it would protect me." "From what?" "From a world that saw her people as obstacles to progress." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "From men like Harrison Caldwell, who think anything or anyone in their path can be removed or destroyed." Ezra was quiet for a long moment. Then hesitantly he placed his hand on her shoulder, a brief touch, comforting rather than presumptuous. "Some men fear what they don't understand." and they destroy what they fear. Abigail looked up at him, struck by the understanding in his eyes. And you? What do you fear, Ezra Bishop? His gaze held hers, something unspoken passing between them. That justice is a luxury only the powerful can afford. He withdrew his hand slowly, and that sometimes, no matter how hard we fight, the truth stays buried. The vulnerability in his admission touched Abigail deeply. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. Then we'll just have to dig deeper. For a heartbeat, he seemed startled by her touch. Then his fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. They stood that way for several moments, connected by more than the simple contact of hands, bound by common purpose, by shared loss, by the strange alchemy of trust forming between them. The moment ended naturally, both of them withdrawing at the same time. But something had changed, subtle but significant. A boundary crossed, a connection acknowledged. We should try to get more sleep, Ezra said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. We'll reach Silvertop tomorrow, and we need to be alert. Abigail nodded, returning to her blanket by the dying fire. Good night, Ezra. Good night, Abigail. As she drifted towards sleep, Abigail realized it was the first time he had used her given name without hesitation, as if it belonged naturally in his mouth. The thought followed her into dreams, dreams of mountains and oceans, of paths that wound between worlds, and of a hand holding hers as she followed them. They reached Silvertop by mid-afternoon the next day. The mining town sprawled across a mountainside, buildings clinging to the steep terrain like barnacles on a ship's hull. Smoke rose from smelters and chimneys, hanging in a gray pall over the valley. The main street was a chaos of wagons, horses, and miners moving between saloons and boarding houses. Charming place, Ezra commented dryly as they approached. Nathan called it progress in its rawest form, Abigail replied. He came here at least once a month for survey work. They had agreed on their approach while breaking camp that morning. They would pose as a married couple, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, passing through on their way further west. Ezra would make inquiries about work while Abigail gathered information more discreetly. Remember, Ezra said quietly as they rode into town, Caldwell has eyes everywhere. Watch what you say and to whom. If you find anything about Nathan, don't act immediately. Come find me first. Abigail nodded, adjusting her shawl to hide the compass she now wore on a leather cord around her neck. The same goes for you. No heroics if you find your contact. He gave her a wry look. I've survived this long by being cautious. Their first stop was a small hotel called the Miner's Rest, a two-story wooden structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The proprietor, a thin woman with sharp eyes and a permanent frown, looked them up and down with obvious suspicion. Room's $1 a night, she said without preamble. Extra for hot water and meals. Just passing through, Ezra replied smoothly, signing the register as Noah Sullivan. My wife and I are heading to Oregon. Thought we'd rest the horses for a day or two. The woman, Mrs. Birch, according to the faded sign behind the desk, sniffed. Plenty pass through, few stay. She handed them a key. Room 6, top of the stairs. No smoking, no excessive noise, no visitors after 9. Their room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Ezra checked the lock on the door and the distance to the ground from the window. Habits of a man who always planned escape routes. I'll head to the saloon, he said, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. See what I can learn about recent railway business. You? The general store first, Abigail replied. Women talk while shopping. Then perhaps the telegraph office. If Nathan's been here, someone might remember him. Ezra hesitated, clearly reluctant to let her go alone. Be careful. If anyone asks, we're looking to invest in land further west. You're gathering supplies while I investigate opportunities. I know how to be discreet, she reminded him with a slight smile. I've been hiding parts of myself all my life. Something in his expression softened. That's not something to be proud of, Abigail. Perhaps not, she acknowledged, but it's a useful skill at the moment. They left the hotel separately, Ezra heading for the Silver Dollar Saloon at the center of town, Abigail toward the general store at the quieter end of the street. The town was even rougher up close, with muddy streets and the constant clatter of ore wagons moving between the mines and the railway depot. The general store was surprisingly well stocked, catering to the needs of miners and the handful of respectable families that had established themselves in Silvertop. Abigail browsed the shelves, selecting a few practical items, coffee, sugar, a small tin of hard candies, while listening to the conversation between the storekeeper and a miner's wife. Third accident this month, the woman was saying, her voice low but agitated. My Henry says it's no coincidence that it's always men who've spoken against the new shaft. Hush, Mabel, the storekeeper warned. Walls have ears in this town. Abigail moved closer, pretending to examine a bolt of calico. Excuse me, she said with an apologetic smile. I couldn't help overhearing. My husband and I are passing through, and we'd heard Silvertop was prospering. Are the mines dangerous? The women exchanged glances, clearly weighing how much to say to a stranger. Finally, the miner's wife, Mabel, shrugged. All mines are dangerous, dear, but some dangers come from the mountain and some from men. She leaned closer. You and your husband planning to stay? Just for a day or two, Abigail assured her. We're heading to Oregon eventually. My husband's looking into some business opportunities while we're here. Tell him to look elsewhere, the storekeeper said bluntly. Silvertop's not for independent sorts. Everything here belongs to Mr. Caldwell, one way or another. Harrison Caldwell? Abigail asked, feigning only mild interest. I believe my husband mentioned that name. A banker, isn't he? Mabel gave a short, humorless laugh. Banker, mine owner, landlord to half the town. Man's got fingers in every paw and eyes in every room. Now, Mabel, the storekeeper cautioned, Mr. Caldwell's brought prosperity to Silvertop. Without him, we'd still be a two-tent camp with no railway connection. Prosperity for some, Mabel muttered. My Henry worked his own claim until Caldwell's men made it clear independent miners weren't welcome anymore. Abigail purchased her items, thanking the women for their advice. As she was leaving, Mabel caught her arm. Word of warning, dear, she said quietly. If your husband's business involves land or mining, he'd best tread carefully. Men who cross Harrison Caldwell have a way of disappearing. The words sent a chill through Abigail. Thank you for the advice, she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. I'll be sure to tell him. Her next stop was the telegraph office, a small building near the railway depot. The operator, a young man with ink-stained fingers and spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger as she entered. Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I assist you? Abigail approached the counter with a practiced smile. Good afternoon. I was wondering if you might help me. My husband and I are traveling, and we were supposed to meet my cousin here in Silvertop. His name is William Hayes. I thought perhaps he might have left a message. The name was a calculated risk, a variation of Nathan's that he had sometimes used for hotel registrations when traveling. The young man frowned thoughtfully. Hayes, don't recall that name specifically. When was he expected? Within the last month, Abigail said. He's an engineer with the railway company. Tall, brown hair, usually carries a leather satchel with surveying equipment. Recognition flickered in the operator's eyes. Oh, you might mean Mr. Hayes, who works at the company office. He's been here longer than a month, though, has a desk at the railway headquarters up on Hill Street. Abigail's heart nearly stopped. Could it be so simple? After 2 years of believing Nathan dead, could he simply be working in a railway office under a slightly different name? That might be him, she said, fighting to keep her voice casual. My cousin William is always finding new opportunities. Is the office far from here? Just up the hill, ma'am. Big building with the company sign out front. Can't miss it. Abigail thanked him and left quickly, her mind racing. She needed to find Ezra, to tell him what she'd discovered. But a stronger impulse pulled her toward Hill Street, toward the railway office, toward the possibility that Nathan was alive and within reach. The railway headquarters occupied a substantial brick building overlooking the town, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. Abigail paused across the street, gathering her courage. What would she say if she saw him? What could possibly explain or justify 2 years of deception? Before she could decide, the building's door opened and a man emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, with the confident stride of someone with authority. Abigail ducked into a doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't Nathan, but Harrison Caldwell himself, instantly recognizable from the few times she had seen him in Clearwater. He hadn't changed much, still impeccably dressed, his silver-streaked beard neatly trimmed, his bearing that of a man accustomed to deference. He was accompanied by two other men, one a railway official judging by his uniform, the other a clerk carrying a stack of documents. Abigail remained hidden until they had passed, then crossed the street quickly. The building's entrance hall was quiet, with a single clerk seated at a desk near the door. "May I help you, ma'am?" he asked, glancing up from his ledger. "I'm looking for William Hayes," Abigail said, summoning a smile. "I believe he works here." The clerk nodded. "Second floor, third door on the right. Surveyor's office." Abigail's legs felt suddenly weak. "Thank you." She climbed the stairs slowly, each step an effort of will. At the top, she paused, drawing a deep breath. The hallway was empty, doors closed on either side, third door on the right. Behind it, perhaps, was the answer to the question that had haunted her for 2 years. She approached the door, noting the simple plaque, Surveyor's office. Before she could lose her nerve, she knocked. "Come in," called a voice from inside, a voice she knew as well as her own. Abigail opened the door with a hand that trembled only slightly. The office was small but well appointed, with maps covering one wall and a large drafting table near the window. And behind a desk piled with documents sat a man she had believed dead, Nathan Winters, or, as he was apparently known here, William Hayes. He didn't look up immediately, continuing to write in a ledger. "Leave the reports on the desk, Johnson. I'll review them later." "Hello, Nathan," Abigail said softly. His head jerked up, the pen falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. The color drained from his face as he stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something that might have been fear. "Abigail." His voice was barely audible. How did you find me?" "I dug up your grave," she replied, her own voice surprisingly steady. "It was empty." Nathan rose slowly from his chair as if in a dream, or a nightmare. He looked older than she remembered, with new lines etched around his eyes and mouth, a streak of gray in his brown hair that hadn't been there before. "You shouldn't be here," he said, moving around the desk. "It's not safe." "Safe?" Abigail felt a bubble of hysterical laughter rise in her throat. "I believed you were dead for 2 years, Nathan. I mourned you. I wore black for months. And all this time, you've been here, alive, working under a different name?" He reached for her, but she stepped back, unwilling to be touched by this stranger who wore her husband's face. "Abigail, please, let me explain." His eyes darted to the door. "Not here. We can't talk here." "Then where?" she demanded. "When? You've had 2 years to explain, Nathan. 2 years." He ran a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture that made her heart ache despite her anger. "There's a place, a cabin outside town. Meet me there in an hour." He scribbled an address on a slip of paper. "Please, Abigail, I know you have questions. I know you are angry, but there are things you don't understand." She took the paper, careful not to let their fingers touch. "1 hour, and Nathan, if you're not there, I'll come back here and make a scene that all of Silvertop will remember." His expression told her he believed the threat. "I'll be there, I promise." He hesitated. Did you come alone?" The question confirmed what she already suspected, that Nathan's disappearance was connected to something dangerous, something that still threatened him, and possibly her as well. "Would it matter if I didn't?" she asked, watching his reaction carefully. A flash of something, fear, guilt, crossed his face. "Just be careful who you trust, Abigail. This town belongs to Caldwell." "So I've heard." She moved toward the door. 1 hour, Nathan." Outside, Abigail leaned against the building's wall, struggling to control her breathing. Nathan was alive. The reality of it was still sinking in, still reshaping her understanding of the past 2 years. The grief, the questions, the gradual suspicion that his death wasn't what it seemed. All of it now transformed into a new set of questions. Why had he disappeared? Why let her believe he was dead? And most troubling of all, what was he doing working for the very company she now suspected of corruption? She needed to find Ezra, to tell him what she discovered. But Nathan's warning echoed in her mind. Be careful who you trust. Could she trust Ezra with this revelation? His quest for justice for Thomas Holloway had already led to violence. What might he do if he found Nathan, a railway employee, alive and well in Silvertop? Abigail touched the compass hidden beneath her shawl, its weight both comfort and burden. Find true north, the inscription read. But which direction was true in a world where the dead returned to life and strangers became allies while husbands became strangers? With a deep breath, she pushed away from the wall and headed toward the Silver Dollar Saloon. Whatever Nathan's reasons, whatever complications might arise, Ezra deserved to know the truth. They had come this far together. She wouldn't leave him in the dark now. The saloon was crowded and noisy, filled with miners fresh from their shift and railway workers enjoying an early drink. Abigail hesitated at the entrance, uncomfortably aware of the stares her presence attracted. Women in establishments like this were generally of a particular profession, and her modest dress and demeanor clearly marked her as something else. She spotted Ezra at a corner table, deep in conversation with a man whose back was to her. Something about his posture, the watchful alertness that never quite left him, made her certain he had already noticed her arrival. Sure enough, as she made her way through the crowded room, he looked up, surprise and concern flashing across his face. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, rising as she reached the table. "I wasn't expecting you here." "I need to speak with you," she said, her voice low but urgent. "It's important." Ezra nodded to the man across from him, a weathered individual with a railway worker's cap and calloused hands. "We'll continue our discussion later, Mr. Jenkins." Jenkins touched his cap, eyeing Abigail curiously before departing with his half-finished drink. Ezra pulled out a chair for her, then sat close enough to speak quietly. "What's happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." The phrase was so apt that Abigail nearly laughed. "In a manner of speaking, I have." She glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. "Nathan is alive. He's here in Silvertop, working for the railway company under the name William Hayes." Ezra's expression hardened. "You're certain you've seen him?" "Just now at the railway office." She twisted her hands in her lap. "He wants to meet me, to explain. At a cabin outside town in an hour." "It could be a trap," Ezra said immediately. "If Caldwell knows who you are, who I am." "Nathan doesn't know about you," Abigail interrupted. "He asked if I'd come alone, but I didn't tell him about you." Ezra considered this, his eyes never leaving her face. "What did he say? About why he disappeared?" "Nothing specific, just that it wasn't safe to talk at the office." She drew a deep breath. "Ezra, I have to go. I have to hear what he has to say." "Not alone," he said firmly. "Whatever his reasons, your husband has been lying to you for 2 years. And he's working for the company we believe killed Thomas and others." "He could be working from the inside," Abigail suggested, "gathering evidence like you. Or he could be complicit." Ezra's voice was gentle, despite the harshness of the words. "We need to consider all possibilities, Abigail." She knew he was right, though part of her wanted desperately to believe Nathan had good reasons for his deception. "What do you suggest?" "I'd go with you to the meeting point, but stay out of sight initially. Let you speak with him alone. If there's trouble, I'll be close enough to help." Abigail nodded slowly. "And if there's no trouble? If his explanation makes sense?" Ezra's expression softened slightly. "Then you have a decision to make, one I can't make for you." The implication was clear. A choice between pursuing justice with Ezra or accepting whatever new reality Nathan offered. A choice Abigail wasn't sure she was ready to face. "There's something else," she said. "The man you were speaking with, Jenkins, is he your contact? The one who was helping Thomas?" Ezra shook his head. "No, just a worker with a grudge against management. Useful for background, but not directly connected to Thomas." He paused. "My contact is proving more difficult to locate than I'd hoped." "We still have time," Abigail said, though she wasn't sure if that was true. Every moment in Silvertop felt precarious, as if they balanced on the edge of a precipice. Ezra checked his pocket watch. "We should go. The cabin's outside town." Abigail showed him the address Nathan had written, about 2 miles north, according to this. "We'll take the horses. Stay on back streets as much as possible." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Whatever happens, Abigail, remember why we came here. The truth may not be what either of us hopes for." She accepted his hand, drawing strength from his steady grip. I stopped hoping for easy truths a long time ago, Ezra. I just want to know what really happened. Then let's find out, he said simply. As they left the saloon, neither noticed the man at the bar watching their departure with keen interest, the same weathered railway worker Ezra had been speaking with. Jenkins drained his glass, left a coin on the counter, and slipped out a side door into the gathering dusk. The cabin stood in a small clearing about 2 miles north of Silvertop, far enough from town to ensure privacy, but close enough to maintain connections. As they approached through the lengthening shadows, Abigail felt her heart pounding against her ribs. After 2 years of believing Nathan dead, she was about to confront him, about to hear whatever explanation he might offer for the deception that had changed her life. "I'll wait in those trees," Ezra said, pointing to a stand of pines about 50 yards from the cabin, close enough to hear a shout, far enough not to be seen immediately. Abigail nodded, suddenly grateful for his steady presence. What if he's not alone? Then I'll be even more glad I came along. Ezra's hand moved to the revolver at his hip, but let's hope it doesn't come to that. They dismounted at the edge of the clearing. Ezra took the reins of both horses, leading them toward the sheltering trees. Before he left, he placed a hand lightly on Abigail's shoulder. "Trust your instincts," he said quietly. "You've survived this long by being careful." "What if my instincts are clouded?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been growing as they rode. "He was my husband, Ezra. I loved him once." His eyes softened with understanding. "Then remember that the man you loved wouldn't have let you grieve for 2 years without good reason." With that gentle but pointed reminder, he melted into the trees, leaving Abigail alone at the edge of the clearing. She straightened her shoulders, touched the compass hidden beneath her shawl for reassurance, and approached the cabin. It was a simple structure, well-maintained but unremarkable, the kind of place a railway employee might keep for occasional use. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and lamplight glowed behind the curtained windows. As Abigail reached the porch, the door opened. Nathan stood framed in the doorway, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. He'd changed from his office attire into more practical clothing, a flannel shirt, denim trousers, sturdy boots. The clothes of a man prepared to move quickly if necessary. "You came," he said, relief plain in his voice. "I wasn't sure you would." "Did I ever break a promise to you?" Abigail asked, the edge in her tone surprising even her. Nathan winced slightly. "No, you never did." He stepped back, gesturing for her to enter. "Please, come in. It's not safe to talk outside." The cabin's interior was sparsely furnished but comfortable. A small sitting area with 2 chairs near the hearth, a kitchen table with a lamp casting warm light, a doorway presumably leading to a bedroom. On the table lay several leather-bound journals similar to the one Abigail had found among Nathan's hidden papers. "Would you like coffee?" Nathan asked, clearly uncertain how to begin this impossible conversation. "Or something stronger? I have whiskey." "I didn't come for refreshments," Abigail replied, remaining standing though her leg ached from the day's travel. "I came for answers, Nathan. Or should I call you William now?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture that sent an unexpected pang through her heart. "I deserve that. Please sit down. This explanation won't be quick or simple." Reluctantly, Abigail took one of the chairs by the fire. Nathan remained standing, as if too agitated to sit. "Start with the explosion," she said. "The one that supposedly killed you. Was it real?" "Yes." Nathan paced to the window, checking outside before turning back to her. "The explosion was real. Men died. I was supposed to be among them." "Supposed to be?" "I received a warning just hours before. A note telling me not to enter the mine that day." Nathan's expression darkened. "I tried to stop the inspection, to warn the others, but Caldwell insisted it proceed as scheduled. He sent another engineer in my place while I was arguing with the site manager." "So the explosion wasn't an accident," Abigail said, pieces falling into place. "It was deliberate, meant to kill you." Nathan nodded grimly. "I'd found discrepancies in the land surveys, alterations made after I'd submitted my reports. Routes changed across certain properties, avoiding others, always benefiting the same small group of investors." "Harrison Caldwell," Abigail guessed. "Caldwell and his partners back east." Nathan finally sat down across from her. "When I started asking questions, making copies of the original surveys, I became a liability. Why not come to me? Abigail asked, the old hurt surfacing. Why let me believe you were dead? Nathan leaned forward, his face earnest in the firelight. Because they would have used you to get to me. The day after the explosion, I returned to our house, planning to get you, to explain everything. But there were men watching, Caldwell's men. His voice tightened. I heard them talking about how the widow might know something, might have access to papers I'd hidden. So you ran, Abigail said, unable to keep the accusation from her tone. You left me alone, unprotected, to face their suspicions. I thought you would be safer if I was truly believed dead, Nathan countered. If I had no contact with you, they would eventually conclude you knew nothing. And I was right, they did leave you alone, didn't they? Until you started looking too closely at things. Abigail laughed bitterly. Left me alone? Caldwell bought up all your debts within weeks of your death. He's been pressuring me to sell our land ever since. When I refused, his men became less subtle in their persuasion. Nathan's face paled. I didn't know. I thought... He broke off, shaking his head. I convinced myself you would be safer without me, that I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself, Abigail said, the truth of it suddenly clear. You were afraid, so you ran. And you've been hiding here, working for the very company that tried to kill you? Not hiding, Nathan corrected. Gathering evidence, working my way into Caldwell's confidence to access records, correspondence, proof of what they have been doing. He gestured to the journals on the table. 2 years of documentation, illegal land seizures, bribery of officials, even records of the accidents arranged for those who stood in their way. Abigail absorbed this, weighing his explanation against her anger, her grief, her growing suspicions. And what do you plan to do with this evidence? Take it to the federal authorities. There's a marshal in Denver who can't be bought, man named Collins. Once he has these journals, Caldwell and his partners will face justice. Nathan leaned forward, his eyes intense. But I need to finish what I've started. I'm close, Abigail. So close to the final piece. Proof connecting Caldwell directly to the deaths. And then what? Abigail asked. After justice is served, what were you planning to do about me? Would you have ever told me you were alive? The question seemed to catch him off guard. I hadn't thought that far ahead, he admitted. I've been so focused on gathering evidence, on staying alive. For 2 years, Nathan. 2 years I spent grieving, questioning, finally suspecting. She met his gaze directly. Did you ever consider what that would do to me? Or was I just a complication in your grand plan for justice? Pain flashed across his face. You weren't a complication. You were the reason I started this. To make things right, to create a world where men like Caldwell couldn't just take whatever they wanted. He reached for her hand, but Abigail pulled back. I know I hurt you. I know I can't undo that. But I'm asking you to understand why I did what I did. Abigail stood, moving to the window to gather her thoughts. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, the clearing visible only by starlight and the faint glow from the cabin windows. Somewhere out there, Ezra was watching, waiting. A man who had been honest with her from the start, even when that honesty revealed uncomfortable truths. There's something you should know, she said finally, turning back to Nathan. I didn't come to Silvertop alone. Nathan tensed visibly. Who's with you? Not Caldwell's men? No, a man named Ezra Bishop. She watched Nathan's reaction carefully. He's investigating the same corruption you are, but for a more personal reason. His friend, Thomas Holloway, was killed in an accident similar to yours. Recognition flashed in Nathan's eyes. Bishop, the journalist from Boston, the one they're blaming for the killings? He didn't kill anyone, Abigail said firmly, but he is determined to find justice for Thomas, just as you claim to be seeking justice for those who died in the explosion. Nathan rose, moving to the window to scan the darkness outside. Where is he now? Nearby, waiting to see if I need help. Abigail studied her husband, this man who had become a stranger. Should I need help, Nathan? He turned to face her, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. No, but Bishop might be in danger. There's a man in town, Jenkins, a railway worker. He's Caldwell's informant. If Bishop has been asking questions, Jenkins will have reported it. Abigail's blood ran cold. Ezra was speaking with a man named Jenkins at the saloon. A railway worker. Nathan swore under his breath. Then Caldwell already knows he's here, and possibly about you as well. He moved quickly to the table, gathering the journals into a leather satchel. We need to leave. Now. Call your friend in. We'll head north, avoid the main roads. Wait, Abigail said, not moving toward the door. I need to know one more thing, Nathan. The compass, the one I found in your grave. What does it mean? What is true north? Nathan paused in his preparations, something unreadable crossing his face. Where is it? The compass? I have it, Abigail said, withdrawing it from beneath her shawl. I've carried it since I found it, hoping it might lead me to answers. It wasn't meant to be found yet, Nathan said softly. He approached, reaching for the compass, but Abigail closed her hand around it. Not until you tell me what it means. Nathan sighed. It belonged to Thomas Holloway originally. He gave it to me when we realized we were both investigating the same corruption. True North was our code, a specific location where we hid copies of our evidence, insurance in case something happened to either of us. You knew Thomas? Abigail asked, surprised by this connection. We met in Silvertop about a month before the explosion. He was posing as a potential investor, gathering information on Caldwell's operation. We recognized in each other a common purpose. Nathan's expression grew distant with memory. He said if anything happened to him, I should find his friend Ezra Bishop. That Bishop would know what to do with the evidence. But you never did, Abigail said. You never contacted Ezra even after Thomas died. Because by then I was supposed to be dead too, Nathan replied, and I wasn't sure who I could trust. He looked toward the window again, anxiety clear in his movements. Abigail, we really need to go. If Caldwell knows about Bishop, he'll send men. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses broke the night's silence. Nathan extinguished the lamp with a quick movement, plunging the cabin into darkness, relieved only by the glow from the fireplace. Back door, he whispered, grabbing the satchel of journals. Through the bedroom, hurry. Abigail hesitated only a moment before following him. Whatever her feelings about Nathan's choices, she had no desire to face Caldwell's men. As they passed through the bedroom toward a rear exit, a gunshot cracked through the night, followed by a shout. Ezra. Your friend is in trouble, Nathan said, pausing at the door. I'll create a diversion. You circle around to the trees where he's waiting. No, Abigail said firmly. I'm not letting you disappear again. We go together. Before Nathan could argue, the cabin's front door splintered open. Voices called out, rough and commanding. Nathan hesitated only a moment longer, then nodded, pushing open the back door and leading Abigail into the darkness. They crouched low, skirting the edge of the clearing toward the stand of pines where Ezra had been waiting. More shots rang out, but it was impossible to tell who was firing or from where. The night had become a confusion of shadows and sounds. Ezra! Abigail called softly as they reached the trees. Ezra, where are you? A figure materialized from the darkness. Not Ezra, but a stocky man with a revolver. Well, well, he said, his voice thick with satisfaction. Look who we have here. William Hayes and his lovely widow. Nathan pushed Abigail behind him, facing the gunman. Jenkins, I should have known. Mr. Caldwell will be right pleased to see you both, Jenkins said, gesturing with his gun. And your friend Bishop, too, once the boys flush him out. I'm right here, came Ezra's voice from deeper in the trees. A moment later, the distinctive click of a hammer being cocked echoed in the darkness. Drop your weapon, Jenkins, or the only thing Caldwell will be pleased about is finding a replacement informant. Jenkins hesitated, his gun still trained on Nathan. You're surrounded, Bishop. Caldwell's got a dozen men out here. That would be more convincing if I hadn't already dealt with 3 of them, Ezra replied calmly. Now drop the gun. For a tense moment, it seemed Jenkins might risk a shot. Then slowly he lowered his weapon. On the ground, Ezra ordered, stepping into view. His own revolver was steady in his hand, his expression hard in the faint starlight. Kick it away. Jenkins complied, sending his gun skittering across the pine needles. Ezra approached cautiously, keeping his weapon trained on the informant. Are you hurt? He asked Abigail, his eyes never leaving Jenkins. We're fine, she replied, but Caldwell's men are at the cabin. Not for long, Ezra said grimly. I set fire to their horses' tails. They'll be busy for a while. He glanced at Nathan, taking his measure with a quick, assessing look. You must be the dead husband. And you must be the accused murderer, Nathan replied with equal directness. Falsely accused, Ezra corrected. So I've heard. Nathan hefted the leather satchel. I have something that might help clear your name and implicate the real murderers. How convenient, Ezra said, skepticism clear in his tone. And you've had this evidence for how long? This isn't the time for debate, Abigail interrupted. We need to leave before Caldwell's men regroup. Ezra nodded, returning his attention to Jenkins. What should we do with him? Nathan considered the informant with cold eyes. Leave him. By the time he makes it back to town on foot, we'll be long gone. And if he raises the alarm sooner, Ezra asked. Then tie him up, Nathan suggested. But I won't be party to murder, if that's what you're considering. Something like respect flickered in Ezra's expression. Nor will I. He turned to Abigail. There's rope in my saddlebag. Can you get it while I keep our friend here covered? Abigail moved to the horses, which were tethered deeper in the trees. As she retrieved the rope, she heard Nathan speaking in low tones to Ezra. The compass. Do you know what it means? True north, Ezra replied. Thomas mentioned it in his last letter to me. A safety measure, he called it. It's more than that, Nathan said. It's the key to everything Caldwell's been after. When Abigail returned with the rope, the two men fell silent, their attention returning to Jenkins. They worked quickly to secure him, gagging him with a bandana to prevent him calling out once they'd left. The horses are ready, Abigail said as they finished. But where are we going? Nathan and Ezra exchanged a look, a moment of unspoken assessment between two men with a common enemy but uncertain alliance. True north, Ezra said finally. If that's where Thomas hid his evidence, that's where we need to go. It's not far, Nathan agreed. A cave in the hills west of here. We can reach it by morning if we ride through the night. And then? Abigail asked, looking between the two men. Then we end this, Ezra said simply. With evidence linking Caldwell to the murders, the federal authorities will have to act. As they mounted their horses and rode away from the clearing, leaving the cabin behind with its broken door and Jenkins tied among the trees, Abigail felt a strange sense of inevitability. The compass around her neck seemed to pulse with its own life, guiding them toward a reckoning that had been years in the making. True north, not just a direction or a location, but a principle, a fixed point in a world where truth had become as shifting and uncertain as shadows in firelight. They rode through the night, following game trails and dried creek beds to avoid the main roads where Caldwell's men might be watching. The moon rose, casting the landscape in silver and shadow, transforming the familiar terrain into something otherworldly. Abigail rode between the two men, Nathan leading, familiar with the route to the cave, Ezra bringing up the rear, watchful for pursuit. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions and tentative alliances. Occasionally, Nathan would point out a landmark or suggest a change in direction, his voice low and practical. Ezra would acknowledge with a nod or brief word, his manner professional but guarded. Only Abigail seemed to exist in both their worlds, connected to each by different bonds of trust and history. As they crested a ridge just before dawn, Nathan held up a hand, signaling a halt. Below them, a narrow valley stretched toward the mountains, bisected by a swift-running stream. On the far side, a small settlement of perhaps a dozen cabins clustered near the water. Arapaho summer camp, Nathan explained quietly. Or it was before the railway surveys pushed them further west. Now it's mostly abandoned, except for a few elders who refused to leave. Abigail felt a tug of recognition, though she had never been to this specific place. My mother spoke of a sacred valley where her people gathered in summer, with a spring that never ran dry, even in drought years. Nathan nodded. This is it. The true north location is in the hills just beyond the settlement. He hesitated, glancing at her. Thomas chose it because of its significance to the Arapaho. He believed that was why Caldwell wanted the railway to avoid this valley, not out of respect, but because of what's in these hills. Gold, Ezra guessed. Something more valuable in the long term, Nathan replied. Water, an underground river that could supply a city. Caldwell's real plan isn't just the railway, it's a city of his own making, with him controlling the most essential resource. And my land, our land near Clearwater? Abigail asked, pieces falling into place. Sits atop the aquifer that feeds this river, Nathan confirmed. That's why he's been so determined to acquire it, one way or another. They made their way down into the valley as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. The settlement appeared deserted, the cabins weathered and still in the early morning. But as they approached, smoke began to rise from one chimney, then another, signs of life stirring with the new day. We should go around, Ezra suggested, his voice low, void being seen. No, Abigail said with sudden certainty. These are my mother's people. They won't betray us to Caldwell. Nathan studied her face, something like regret in his eyes. You're embracing that part of yourself now? Your Arapaho heritage? I'm embracing all of who I am, she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Something I should have done long ago. As they rode into the settlement, an elderly woman emerged from the nearest cabin. Her face was deeply lined, her silver hair braided and wrapped with strips of red cloth. She watched their approach with calm, assessing eyes. Grandmother, Abigail said, dismounting and approaching with respect. We seek safe passage. The woman studied her for a long moment. You have your mother's eyes, she said finally, her voice rich with age and wisdom. Sarah Running Water's daughter. Abigail's breath caught. It had been years since she had heard her mother's Arapaho name spoken aloud. You knew her? She was my cousin's child. The elder's gaze moved to Nathan and Ezra, who had remained on their horses. And these men? Allies, Abigail said simply. We're being pursued by Harrison Caldwell and his men. We seek shelter just for a few hours. The old woman's expression hardened at Caldwell's name. That one has brought nothing but sorrow to our people. She gestured toward a larger cabin at the center of the settlement. Come, you will be safe with us until you continue your journey. Inside the communal cabin, several other elders had gathered around a central fire pit, where coffee simmered in a large pot. They welcomed Abigail with quiet dignity, offering food and drink to the travelers. Nathan and Ezra accepted with thanks, though both remained alert, taking positions that allowed them to watch the windows. Your mother was beloved among us, the first elder, who introduced herself as Standing Willow, told Abigail as they ate. We mourned when she chose to leave with your father, but we understood her heart. She never stopped honoring your ways, Abigail said, memories of her mother's quiet ceremonies flooding back, even in a world that didn't understand them. Standing Willow nodded, satisfaction in her weathered face. And now her daughter returns, wearing the protection spirit. She pointed to the small stone coyote that hung alongside the compass around Abigail's neck. Where did you find such a talisman? A child gave it to me, Abigail explained. A girl named Grace who lived near Rivercross. She said it belonged to her grandmother, a woman called Four Winds. A ripple of murmurs passed through the elders. Standing Willow's eyes widened slightly. Four Winds was my sister. She had no grandchildren that we knew of. Grace said her grandmother taught her about the spirit stones and the plants, Abigail said, confusion growing. She seemed to know the old ways, though she lived with her uncle, a white man. Four Winds had a daughter who married a white trader, one of the other elders offered. They had a child, a girl, but both parents died of fever many winters ago. We heard the child died as well. Grace is alive, Abigail insisted. I spoke with her myself. She has dark hair but the most striking blue eyes. Standing Willow and the other elders exchanged significant glances. Blue eyes like the summer sky, Standing Willow murmured, like her father and like Thomas Holloway. Ezra, who had been listening quietly, straightened at this. What did you say? Standing Willow turned to him. The trader who married Four Winds' daughter was brother to Thomas Holloway. He came west before the Great War, changed his name to Wilson, but we knew him by his spirit. Bold but kind, with eyes the color of the summer sky. Wilson, well, Ezra repeated, the name clearly significant. And his child, a girl with blue eyes, would be Thomas's niece. Grace Wilson, Abigail said, the connection suddenly clear. She lives with her uncle at the mill in Rivercross, but not Thomas, another relative. Thomas had no other brothers that I knew of, Ezra said, his brow furrowed in concentration. But there was a cousin, Harrison. They were close as children, I recall Thomas saying. A cold realization dawned on Abigail. Harrison Caldwell? Nathan, who had been standing by the window, turned sharply. Caldwell's real name is Holloway? He's related to Thomas? It would explain much, Standing Willow said gravely. Why he claimed the child after her parents died. Why he keeps her close but hidden away. But treats her poorly, Abigail added, remembering Grace's thin frame and patched dress, as if she were an obligation rather than family. Or a pawn, Ezra said, his voice tight with anger. A way to control Thomas, perhaps? Threaten his niece if he revealed what he knew? Before anyone could respond to this disturbing theory, the door burst open. A young Arapaho man entered, his expression urgent. Riders, he reported to Standing Willow. Many, coming from the east. Caldwell, Nathan said grimly, moving away from the window. He must have picked up our trail. Standing Willow rose with dignity. You must go, take the path behind this cabin. It leads to the sacred cave, your true north. She gestured to two of the younger men present. Show them the hidden way. As they hastily gathered their belongings, Abigail turned to the elder. Why are you helping us? You don't even know our purpose. Standing Willow's aged eyes held ancient wisdom. I know the compass you wear. I know the men who seek you mean harm to our people and our land. That is enough. She placed gnarled hands on Abigail's shoulders. Go with our blessing, daughter of Sarah Running Water. Find your true north, in the cave and in your heart. They slipped out the back of the cabin, following their guides up a narrow trail that wound into the hills behind the settlement. From this elevation, they could see riders approaching in the distance, at least a dozen men, led by a figure in a dark coat that could only be Harrison Caldwell himself. How did he find us so quickly? Abigail wondered, breathless from the steep climb. Jenkins must have gotten free, Nathan suggested. Or Caldwell has more informants than we realized. Or he's been watching the valley all along, Ezra added grimly. If he knows about True North, he might have guessed we'd come here eventually. Their guides led them to a narrow fissure in the rock face, almost invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. The sacred cave, one explained. Follow it deep. There are many chambers. You will find what you seek in the one with blue stones in the ceiling, like stars. With hasty thanks, they entered the fissure, which widened into a passage large enough to walk upright. Nathan produced a small lantern from his satchel, its light revealing smooth walls carved by ancient waters. They moved deeper into the mountain, the sounds of the outside world fading behind them. The passage branched several times, but each fork was marked with small, stacked stones, trail markers left by Thomas or Nathan to guide the way. After what felt like an hour of walking, they entered a large chamber where the ceiling arched high above, embedded with veins of a blue mineral that caught the lamplight like stars in a night sky. This is it, Nathan said, his voice hushed in the vast space. True North. At the center of the chamber stood a natural column of stone, and nestled in a crevice at its base was a metal box, a cash box, sturdy and weather-tight. Ezra approached it reverently, kneeling to lift it from its hiding place. Thomas's insurance, he said, his voice thick with emotion. What he died to protect. The box was locked, but the key hung on a leather cord around its handle. Inside were documents, land deeds, surveyor's maps, letters between Caldwell and his eastern investors, and most damning of all, receipts for payments to men who had later caused accidents at properties Caldwell wanted to acquire. This is enough, Nathan said, examining the papers with professional interest. More than enough to bring Caldwell down and implicate his partners. And clear my name, Ezra added, holding a particular document, a forged order with his signature, authorizing actions he had never approved. As they sorted through the evidence, Abigail wandered to the edge of the chamber, where a narrow opening led to another space. Curious, she stepped through, finding herself in a smaller room where a spring bubbled up from the ground, forming a clear pool before disappearing again into the earth. The source, she murmured, understanding now why this place was sacred to her mother's people. This underground river, this perpetual spring, was the lifeblood of the valley, and the treasure Caldwell truly sought. She knelt beside the pool, its surface as still as glass despite the water flowing through it. In its reflection, she saw herself clearly for perhaps the first time, not just Sarah Running Water's daughter or Nathan Winter's wife, but Abigail, a woman of two worlds who had finally stopped denying either part of herself. A sound behind her made her turn. Ezra stood in the opening between chambers, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Nathan says we should leave soon, he said. Take a different route back to avoid Caldwell's men. Abigail nodded, rising to her feet. And then? To the federal marshal in Denver, Ezra replied. With this evidence, Caldwell won't be able to escape justice. And after that? She pressed, needing to know where his thoughts led beyond this mission that had consumed him. Ezra hesitated, something vulnerable crossing his usually guarded face. I hadn't thought that far ahead, he admitted. For so long, finding justice for Thomas has been my only purpose. And now you've found it, Abigail said softly. What will give your compass direction next? He stepped closer, his eyes holding hers. What about you, Abigail? Now that you've found Nathan alive, what direction will you choose? It was the question she had been avoiding since seeing Nathan in his Silvertop office. Her husband was alive, but the life they had shared was gone, irrevocably altered by his choices and by her own journey since his death. I don't know yet, she answered truthfully, but I know I can't go back to who I was before. Too much has changed. Ezra nodded, understanding in his eyes. We should rejoin Nathan, make our plans for reaching Denver. As they turned to leave the spring chamber, a new sound reached them, voices echoing through the cave passages, many voices, and the unmistakable metallic click of weapons being readied. They've found us, Ezra said, his hand moving to his gun. Quickly, back to the main chamber. They hurried through the opening to find Nathan already gathering the documents back into the metal box, his movements swift and efficient. Caldwell's men, Abigail explained, coming through the caves. Nathan swore under his breath. There must be another entrance they know about. He handed the box to Ezra. Take this. There's a passage at the back of this chamber that leads to a higher exit. You and Abigail go that way. I'll hold them off here. That's suicide, Ezra objected. There must be at least a dozen of them. And they'll be forced to come through that narrow passage, Nathan pointed out. I can delay them long enough for you to get clear. No, Abigail said firmly. No more separations, no more sacrifices. We go together or not at all. The voices were closer now, echoing eerily through the stone passages. They had minutes at most before Caldwell's men reached them. There's another way, Abigail said suddenly, remembering something Grace had told her. The sacred cave has many chambers, many paths. Some lead to places only the spirits know. What are you suggesting? Nathan asked, skepticism clear in his tone. Abigail touched the stone coyote at her neck. That we trust the protection spirit and the knowledge of my mother's people. The narrow passage Abigail chose wound deeper into the mountain, away from the approaching voices, but also away from any known exit. Nathan followed reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with a plan based on what he considered superstition. Ezra came last, the metal box secure in his satchel, his revolver ready in his hand. Are you sure about this? Nathan whispered, as the passage narrowed further, forcing them to proceed in single file. We could be trapping ourselves. I'm sure, Abigail replied, though in truth she was operating on intuition rather than certainty. The stories her mother had told, the patterns of the sacred caves, the guidance of the protection spirit, these were her compass now. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow they had to squeeze through sideways. The lantern cast just enough light to see a few feet ahead, the darkness beyond absolute and intimidating. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, suggesting Caldwell's men had lost their trail in the maze of tunnels. Just as Nathan was about to voice another objection, the passage widened abruptly, opening into a vast chamber unlike any they had seen before. The lantern's light couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls, giving the impression of having entered a subterranean cathedral. The air was different here, fresher, with a faint scent of pine. There must be an opening to the outside, Ezra observed, pointing to a soft illumination high above, daylight filtering through some unseen fissure in the mountain. As they moved further into the chamber, their footsteps echoed strangely, creating phantom sounds that seemed to come from all directions. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Look, Abigail said suddenly, pointing to the far side of the chamber where a shaft of sunlight broke through, illuminating a natural stone formation that resembled a platform or altar. They approached cautiously, the light growing stronger as they neared. Above the stone platform, a narrow chimney in the rock led straight up to the sky, visible as a small blue circle far above. A way out? Nathan suggested hopefully. Too narrow, Ezra assessed, and too steep. It would be like climbing a smooth-walled well. Before they could discuss alternatives, a new sound reached them. A single set of footsteps, measured and deliberate, entering the chamber from another passage they hadn't noticed. The three turned, weapons ready, as a figure emerged from the shadows into the shaft of sunlight. Harrison Caldwell stood before them, impeccably dressed despite the cave dust that powdered his shoulders. His silver-streaked beard was neatly trimmed, his bearing that of a man accustomed to command. Unlike his men, he carried no visible weapon, though his confidence suggested he didn't feel he needed one. "Mrs. Winters," he said, nodding to Abigail, as if greeting her at a social event. "Mr. Hayes, or should I say Winters, and Ezra Bishop himself. How convenient to find all three of you together." "How did you find us?" Nathan demanded, positioning himself slightly in front of Abigail. Caldwell smiled, the expression not reaching his cold eyes. "I've known about this place for years. These caves, this valley, all part of my investment in the future." He gestured around the chamber. "Beautiful, isn't it? An entire underground river system, pure and untapped. Enough water to supply a city, my city. At the expense of the Arapaho who have held this land sacred for generations," Abigail said, anger rising in her voice. "Progress requires sacrifice," Caldwell replied dismissively. "Your mother's people should understand that better than most. History moves forward, Mrs. Winters. Those who stand in its way are simply erased." "Like Thomas Holloway?" Ezra asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Was he erased for progress too?" Something shifted in Caldwell's expression, a flicker of what might have been genuine regret. Thomas made his choice. He could have been part of this, could have shared in the prosperity. Instead, he chose principles over family. "Family," Ezra repeated, understanding dawning. "You're Harrison Holloway, Thomas's cousin." "Once, yes." Caldwell, or Holloway, straightened his already perfect cuffs. "I changed my name after the war. A fresh start, unburdened by the past." "And Grace?" Abigail asked. "Is she just another burden to be unburdened? Another sacrifice for progress?" Caldwell's composure slipped slightly, genuine surprise crossing his face. "You know about the child?" "We know she's Thomas's niece," Ezra said. "We know you've been keeping her hidden away, using her as leverage." A harsh laugh escaped Caldwell. "Is that what you think? That I've been keeping her as some kind of hostage?" He shook his head. "Grace is my responsibility, the only family I have left. I've protected her the only way I know how, by keeping her separate from my business affairs." "You call that protection?" Abigail challenged. "Living with a drunk at a mill, dressed in rags, treated like a servant?" "Better that than the target she would become if people knew her true identity," Caldwell countered. "The Holloway name carries weight and risk. I learned that in the war when our family's northern sympathies made us targets in our southern hometown." His voice hardened. "Everything I've built for her future. A new city, a new empire, with water as its foundation. Built on corruption, intimidation, and murder," Nathan said, disgust clear in his tone. "Some legacy." Caldwell's gaze sharpened. "You, of all people, should understand the necessity of difficult choices, Winters. You were willing to let your wife believe you were dead for 2 years. For what? Some abstract notion of justice?" "To protect her," Nathan insisted, "from you." "And how did that work out?" Caldwell asked, his tone almost conversational. "Here she is anyway, in the very danger you tried to shield her from, and not alone." His gaze moved between Nathan and Ezra, noting something in their stances, their expressions. "Interesting. I wonder if your wife told you how cozy she and Bishop have become during your death." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "We're leaving, Caldwell. With the evidence, it's over." "Evidence?" Caldwell seemed genuinely amused. "You mean Thomas's little collection of papers? Damning, certainly, but hardly comprehensive, and worthless if it never reaches the authorities." He raised a hand, signaling to someone behind him. "My men are throughout these caves. You won't make it to the surface, let alone to Denver." As if to emphasize his point, armed men appeared at the edges of the chamber, emerging from shadows and side passages. At least 8 that Abigail could count, all with rifles trained on their small group. "I'm offering you a choice," Caldwell continued. "Surrender the documents, agree to disappear, truly disappear this time, and you all live. Fight, and you die here, another tragic accident in the dangerous caves of Wyoming territory." Ezra's hand tightened on his revolver, his expression resolute. and let you continue killing with impunity? I don't think so. Think of Grace, Abigail said suddenly, an idea forming. What happens to her if you die here, Caldwell? Who protects her then? No one would dare, Caldwell began. No one would know she needs protection, Abigail interrupted, except us, and we'd be dead according to your plan. Uncertainty crossed Caldwell's face for the first time. What are you suggesting? A different choice, Abigail said, stepping forward despite Nathan's attempt to hold her back. One that ensures Grace's safety, no matter what happens here. I'm listening, Caldwell said cautiously. You let us go, with the evidence. In return, we ensure Grace is taken to safety, to people who will care for her properly. Your men can't follow us, can't harm us. And I simply surrender? Caldwell scoffed. Accept ruin and imprisonment? You accept responsibility, Abigail corrected. Face the consequences of your actions. Yes, but knowing Grace is safe, protected by people who understand her heritage. Both sides of it. The Arapaho, Caldwell realized. You'd take her to them. To Standing Willow and the others in the valley, Abigail confirmed, where she can learn about her grandmother's people while still honoring her father's blood. Where she'll be safe from those who might seek revenge against the Holloway name. Caldwell seemed to be considering her words, something like genuine emotion crossing his normally controlled features. For a moment, Abigail glimpsed the man he might have been, a man who cared for family, who understood loyalty, before greed and ambition corrupted those qualities. How touching, came a new voice from the shadows. Jenkins stepped into the light, his face bruised from their earlier encounter, but his expression triumphant. A family reunion, but I'm afraid Mr. Caldwell isn't authorized to make such deals. Caldwell turned sharply. What are you talking about, Jenkins? The investors have lost confidence in your leadership, sir, Jenkins said, false regret in his tone. Too many loose ends. Too much sentimentality. He produced a revolver, pointing it not at Ezra, Nathan, or Abigail, but at Caldwell himself. They've decided a change of management is required. Understanding dawned on Caldwell's face. Thornton and the others. They're cutting me out. Cleaning house, Jenkins corrected. Starting with you and these troublemakers. The project will continue under new direction. He gestured with his free hand, and the armed men around the chamber repositioned, some now training their weapons on Caldwell as well. You fool, Caldwell spat. You think Thornton will let you live once you've done his dirty work? You know too much. Jenkins smiled unpleasantly. I know how to make myself valuable. More than you did. He raised his voice, addressing the gunmen. Take care of them, all of them. Make it look like a cave-in. Back in the Arapaho settlement, as Standing Willow prepared the morning meal, a small figure appeared at her door. Grace stood there, breathless from running, her blue eyes wide with urgency. The sacred cave, the child gasped. They're going to hurt each other there. I saw it. Standing Willow studied the girl's face. Four Winds had spoken of this child, her great-granddaughter with the gift of sight. What did you see, little one? The woman with two spirits, white and Arapaho, Grace explained, her small hands moving expressively. And the men with her. They're looking for true north, but the bad men are following. There will be blood in the sacred place if we don't stop it. The old woman recognized the description of Abigail immediately. Among the elders, word had already spread about the half-Arapaho woman who had returned to the valley with two men seeking the sacred cave. How do you know this place? Standing Willow asked, testing the child. Grace's expression grew distant. Grandmother Four Winds showed me in dreams. Many times. She said I would need to go there one day. She focused again on Standing Willow, her gaze unnervingly direct. We have to hurry. The elders gathered quickly. Some argued against bringing the child to a place of danger, but Grace's certainty in the specific details she provided, details only one with true dreams could know, convinced them. Within the hour, they were making their way through hidden trails that led deep into the mountain, following the guidance of a child who moved as if she had walked these paths many times before in her dreams. What happened next occurred so quickly that Abigail would later struggle to reconstruct the sequence. As Jenkins gave his order, several things happened simultaneously. Ezra drew and fired in one fluid motion, his bullet striking Jenkins in the shoulder. Nathan lunged forward, tackling Caldwell to the ground as gunfire erupted from the men around the chamber, and a new voice, young, clear, and commanding, echoed through the cavern. Stop! In the momentary confusion, all eyes turned to the source of the voice. Grace Wilson stood at the entrance to one of the passages, her small figure illuminated by a shaft of light, making her appear almost ethereal. Behind her stood Standing Willow and several other Arapaho elders who had followed the child's prophetic guidance. Grace? Caldwell's voice cracked with genuine emotion. What are you doing here? How? I saw it, the child said simply. In a dream, on all of you, here in the sacred cave, the stones weeping blood. She stepped forward, remarkably unafraid despite the gun's intention. I told grandmother Four Winds' friends. They brought me. Standing Willow moved to stand beside the child, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. This place is sacred, she announced, her aged voice carrying surprising authority. No blood will be shed here today. Jenkins, clutching his wounded shoulder, laughed harshly. You think a few old Indians and a child can stop what's happening? This isn't your land anymore, old woman. It belongs to progress. It belongs to the spirits, Grace contradicted, with the absolute conviction only a child can muster. And they're angry. As if summoned by her words, a low rumble emanated from deep within the mountain. Dust and small stones rained down from above as the ground trembled slightly beneath their feet. Earthquake, Nathan said, his face pale in the dim light. Warning, Standing Willow corrected. The mountain speaks. It tells us to leave this sacred place in peace, or it will close forever. The armed men exchanged nervous glances, superstition overcoming their loyalty to money. When the rumbling came again, stronger this time, several broke ranks, heading for the passages that led to the surface. Come back, you cowards, Jenkins shouted, but his authority was crumbling as quickly as the ceiling above. In the chaos, Abigail made her decision. She moved to Grace's side, kneeling to meet the child's unnervingly perceptive eyes. You need to go with Standing Willow now, she said urgently. She'll take you somewhere safe. Grace studied her face. You won't come? I have something I need to finish first, Abigail replied, but I'll find you after, I promise. The girl nodded, accepting this with the same matter-of-fact trust she had shown when giving Abigail the protection stone. Follow the water, she said cryptically. It knows the way out. Standing the Willow gestured to the other elders, who began shepherding the remaining armed men toward one of the larger passages. This way quickly, before the mountain's anger grows. Caldwell, who had risen to his feet during the confusion, stood frozen, watching Grace with an expression of mingled loss and resignation. Grace, he called. I tried, in my way. I tried to protect you. The child looked back at him, wisdom beyond her years in her blue eyes. I know, Uncle Harrison, but you forgot to protect yourself. With that simple observation, she turned and followed Standing Willow into the passage. Another stronger tremor shook the chamber, larger rocks now falling from the ceiling. The remaining men fled, leaving only Abigail, Nathan, Ezra, Caldwell, and the wounded Jenkins. We need to go, Nathan urged, grabbing Abigail's arm. This whole place could come down. Grace said to follow the water, Abigail insisted, remembering the underground river they had seen earlier. It must lead to an exit. We can't leave him, Ezra said suddenly, nodding toward Jenkins, who had collapsed against a boulder, blood spreading across his shirt. Or him, Abigail added, looking at Caldwell, who stood as if frozen in place, watching the passage where Grace had disappeared. They wouldn't have shown us the same mercy, Nathan argued. That's why we're different, Abigail replied simply. That's why we deserve to win. The decision made, they moved quickly. Ezra and Nathan half-carried, half-dragged Jenkins, while Abigail approached Caldwell. Come with us, she said, no longer seeing the powerful, corrupt businessman, but a man who had lost everything that mattered. For Grace's sake. Caldwell's eyes refocused on her face. Why would you help me, after everything I've done? Because Grace was right, Abigail said as another tremor shook the cave. You protected her, but forgot to protect yourself from what you were becoming. She held out her hand. There's still time to choose differently. After a moment's hesitation, Caldwell took her offered hand. Together they hurried after the others, following the sound of running water deeper into the mountain as the sacred chamber collapsed behind them. The underground river led them through twisting passages, sometimes so low they had to wade bent double through knee-deep water. Jenkins fell unconscious halfway through the journey, carried now entirely by Ezra and Nathan. Caldwell moved as if in a daze, following without question or complaint. When they finally emerged, it was through a waterfall that cascaded down a cliff face miles from where they had entered the cave system. The afternoon sun was blinding after the darkness, the air sweet with pine and sage. Below them, the valley stretched green and peaceful, the small Arapaho settlement barely visible in the distance. They made their way down to level ground, laying Jenkins on the grass where Nathan could examine his wound properly. "He'll live," he pronounced after a brief inspection, though he might wish otherwise when the federal marshals get hold of him. "And Caldwell?" Ezra asked, nodding to where the banker sat on a boulder, staring out across the valley. "That depends on him," Abigail said, "on the choices he makes now." As if hearing his name, Caldwell turned to them. "The evidence," he said, his voice hollow. "The documents Thomas and Nathan gathered. They implicate others besides me. Powerful men back east who won't stop just because I'm arrested." "Then you'll testify against them," Ezra said. "Not a question, but a statement. Tell the authorities everything, in exchange for consideration in your own case. And protection for Grace," Abigail added. Caldwell considered this, then nodded slowly. "For Grace." He looked at Abigail with new respect. "You were right about one thing, Mrs. Winters. I did forget to protect myself from what I was becoming. I was so focused on building a legacy that I lost sight of why I wanted one in the first place." "It's not too late to build a different legacy," she said gently. "One Grace can be proud of." As they prepared to make their way to the nearest town where they could send telegrams to the federal authorities, Abigail found herself standing between Nathan and Ezra, the husband she had mourned and the man who had helped her find her true north. "What will you do now?" Nathan asked quietly, the question meant for her alone. Abigail touched the compass at her throat, feeling its weight and significance. "I'm not sure yet, but I know I can't go back to who I was before." She looked at him directly. "Can you?" Nathan shook his head, regret and understanding in his eyes. "No, too much has changed. I'm not the man you married anymore. And I'm not the woman you left behind," she agreed. Her gaze moved to Ezra, who stood a respectful distance away, giving them privacy for this moment of recognition and release. "He's a good man," Nathan said, following her gaze. "Better than I was, perhaps." "Different," Abigail corrected gently. "You both did what you thought was right, in your own ways." Nathan nodded, acceptance in his face. "And now, what does your compass tell you is right?" Abigail looked out across the valley toward the settlement, where Grace was now safe among people who would understand both sides of her heritage, toward a future that was uncertain but, for the first time in years, full of genuine possibility. "That true north isn't a place," she said softly. "It's a direction, a choice made again and again, with each step forward." As they began the journey back to civilization, the compass hung warm against Abigail's heart. No longer a mystery to be solved, but a reminder that finding one's way isn't about reaching a final destination. It's about choosing, with each decision, to move toward what is true, what is right, what is authentic to oneself. In the end, that was the real meaning of True North. The sun was setting by the time they reached the small trading post where they could telegraph the federal authorities. As Nathan went inside to send the message, Abigail found herself standing alone with Ezra at the edge of the porch, watching the golden light transform the landscape. "What will you do after Denver?" she asked softly. "When justice is served and your name is cleared?" Ezra turned to her, his eyes reflecting the sunset. "I've been thinking of heading west. Oregon, maybe. Land where a man might build something honest." He hesitated. "It's a journey best not taken alone." Abigail felt the compass warm against her skin as she met his gaze. No words were needed for the understanding that passed between them. The path ahead was uncharted, but they would navigate it together, each step guided by their own true north. As they prepared to leave the next morning, Abigail tucked Grace's stone coyote safely alongside the compass. Two guides from different worlds, leading to the same destination, home.